She was standing in 14-degree weather with a dead car, a 7-year-old crying in the back seat, and her jaw set so tight it looked like it might crack. And when Damian Sterling pulled over and asked if she needed help, Emily Parker looked him dead in the eye and said, "We're fine." They were not fine. That moment, that single, stubborn, heartbreaking moment, was the one that changed everything. Not because he rescued her, but because he stayed anyway. This is not a story about a billionaire sweeping in to save a struggling woman. This is a story about two people, both broken in ways nobody could see, learning that the hardest thing in the world isn't surviving alone. It's finally letting someone stand beside you. If this story finds something in you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The day Emily Parker moved into apartment 4B, she made 3 trips up the stairs carrying everything she owned. 2 large duffel bags, a box of Lily's books, a secondhand lamp with a bent neck, and a folded-up cardboard sign she'd been using as a doorstop at the old place. She didn't take the elevator. The elevator required waiting, and waiting meant someone might offer to help, and Emily Parker did not do help. She had learned that lesson the hard way. More than once. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of afternoon where the sun showed up just long enough to remind you it was leaving soon. The building was a 6-story brick walk-up on the edge of Clover Street in downtown Chicago. Not terrible, not great, the kind of place that worked hard to look decent without quite getting there. The hallway smelled like old radiator heat and someone's Tuesday dinner, and the carpet runner on the 3rd floor had a rip in it that caught your toe if you weren't paying attention. Emily was paying attention. She always was. She was 30 years old, though the circles under her eyes told a different story on the bad weeks. 5'4", with dark hair she kept in a ponytail most days because there wasn't time for anything else, and hands that were starting to callous from the double shifts at Rourke's Diner, where she worked the early morning and late lunch tables 6 days a week. She had a quiet face, the kind that didn't give much away unless you knew what to look for. And most people didn't bother to look. Lily, her 7-year-old, carried her own small backpack up the stairs without being asked. That detail alone could break your heart if you let it. "Is this our new home?" Lily asked, standing in the doorway of 4B, taking it in with the serious eyes she'd inherited from her mother. Emily set down the lamp and looked around the apartment. The water stain on the ceiling above the kitchen, the window that stuck slightly on the left side, the radiator that already looked like it had opinions. She made a mental list. She always made lists. "It's ours," Emily said. "That's what matters." Lily seemed to accept this. She walked to the window that looked out over the street and pressed her small nose against the glass. "I can see a bakery." "Don't get excited. We're not buying from bakeries." "I know." Lily said it without sadness, which was almost worse. "But I can still look." Emily started unpacking. She had a system. Like, she had a system for everything. Kitchen first, because meals were non-negotiable. Lily's room second, because the kid needed to feel settled before school tomorrow. Her own room last, because her own room could wait. It always waited. She was assembling Lily's secondhand bed frame when she heard the door across the hall open. She didn't look up. People opened doors. That wasn't her business. What she heard next was a small voice, younger than Lily, maybe 5 or 6, saying very clearly, "Daddy, I'm hungry." And then a man's voice, low and a little tired. "I know, Bug. Give me 10 minutes. Emily focused on the bed frame bolt in her hand. She heard shuffling, a grocery bag, the door closing, then quiet. That was the first time she heard Damian Sterling. She didn't think much of it. She thought about it less the following morning when her alarm went off at 4:45, and she was already awake anyway, lying in the dark running numbers in her head the way she did most nights instead of sleeping. Rent was covered for November. Barely. The electric bill from the old place still had a balance she was paying off in installments. Lily needed new shoes before winter hit. The left one on her current pair was separating at the toe, and Emily had been pressing it back together with a dab of superglue every few days, like some kind of structural engineer in denial. She got up, she made coffee, she packed Lily's lunch for school, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, a small bag of pretzels, and a juice box. And she wrote a note on a Post-it that said, "You're doing great, kid, because Lily had been anxious about starting at the new school, and Emily didn't know how else to say "I see you" in a way that didn't embarrass a 7-year-old. She stuck the note inside the lunch bag where Lily would find it at noon. Then she put on her diner uniform, tucked her hair back, and left for the 6:15 bus. The hallway outside 4B was quiet. The door across the hall, 4A, had a small smear of crayon on the lower panel that hadn't been there yesterday. Emily noticed it the way she noticed everything, filed it, moved on. Why? She learned his name 2 weeks after moving in, and she learned it the way you learn most things in a building like that, from Mrs. Calvo on the second floor, who knew everything about everyone and considered this a public service. "That's Damien Sterling," Mrs. Calvo said, leaning on her doorframe with a cup of tea and the comfortable authority of someone who had lived in 4A's sight line for 6 years. "You know Sterling Capital, the investment firm? That's him." Emily had heard of Sterling Capital the way you hear of things that have nothing to do with your life, distantly, like weather in another city. "He lives here?" she asked, because the building was fine, but it wasn't that fine. Mrs. Calvo shrugged. "He moved in about 3 years ago, right after the divorce. Wanted somewhere smaller, quieter. He's got the little girl, Sophie. Sweet kid. She's 6. She paused meaningfully. "He does everything himself. No nanny, no housekeeper. Drops her at school every morning, picks her up every afternoon. Works from home most days." Another pause, more meaningful. "He's 32. Mrs. Calvo. "I'm just telling you facts." "Thank you for the facts," Emily said, and went back inside. She saw him properly for the first time that Friday. She was coming back from her double shift. It was nearly 9 at night, and she was the particular kind of tired that sat behind your eyes and made the stairs feel longer than they were. When she heard the sound of a power drill coming from apartment 4A, and then a very clear, very adult "damn it," followed by what she could only describe as the noise of a man sitting down hard on a floor. She stopped outside his door. Didn't knock, just stood there for a moment. Then the door opened. He was tall, 6'2" maybe, with dark hair that needed a cut, and the particular look of a man who had been fighting with furniture for longer than was dignified. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with a smear of something on the shoulder and holding a drill in one hand and a stripped screw in the other. There were dark circles under his eyes. His jaw had about 3 days of growth on it that wasn't quite a beard and wasn't quite not. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Hi," he said. "You moved in across the hall." 2 weeks ago," she said. "Yes." "Right." He glanced at the screw in his hand with the expression of a man deciding whether to apologize for the noise. "Sophie's bookshelf. The instructions make no sense." Emily looked at the screw. "You stripped the thread. You need a wider anchor." He blinked. "How do you know that?" "I've built a lot of furniture," she said, which was the simplest version of the truth. He looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite surprise, but was close to it. "Damien," he said, and offered his hand, the one without the drill. "Emily." She shook it. His hand was warm. "I'd offer to introduce you properly, but Sophie's been asleep for 40 minutes, and I'm not risking that." He said it with a flat sincerity that she understood completely. "Same," she said, nodding toward her door. "Lily's been out since 8. Something passed between them in that hallway, a kind of recognition, the way two people who are running the same race nod at each other across the track. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't even particularly warm. It was just honest. "Good luck with the bookshelf," she said. "Thanks." He looked back at the screw. "I'll probably need it." She went inside. She did not think about him, except she thought about him slightly for approximately 4 minutes before she fell asleep. October gave way to November, and November turned mean. Emily's schedule had settled into something that looked like routine from the outside but felt like controlled emergency from the inside. Up at 4:45. Bus at 6:15. First shift at the diner until 1. Second shift from 3 to 8, sometimes 9. Home. Check homework. Read to Lily if she wasn't already asleep. Make tomorrow's lunch. Pay something online. Stare at the ceiling. Start over. On the days she had a gap between shifts, she picked Lily up from school herself. On the days she didn't, Lily went to the after-school program until Emily could get there, and Emily paid for it in installments she had personally negotiated with the school administrator, Mrs. Huang, who had been kind about it in a way that still made Emily's face go hot when she thought about it. She did not like needing kindness. It felt too much like debt. The building had its textures that she learned the way you learn a new geography. Which step on the third floor creaked, which light in the stairwell was out, and had been out for weeks based on the dried tape mark where someone had put up a note about it once and given up. The porch light outside 4B had been flickering for 10 days. She'd put in a maintenance request. Nothing had happened. She'd stopped expecting it to. She saw Damien in passing, at the mailboxes, on the stairs, once in the parking lot when they happened to pull in at the same time, her in the second-hand Civic with the heater that worked on faith and good weather. He always had Sophie with him after school hours. The kid was small and blonde with the serious face of someone who thought very carefully before speaking, and she'd apparently decided that Emily was interesting because she stared at Emily with great focus every time they passed each other. "Hi," Sophie said one afternoon in the mailbox alcove, while Damien was sorting through what looked like an unreasonable amount of mail. "Hi," Emily said. "What's your name?" "Emily." "I'm Sophie. I'm 6. She held up 6 fingers to confirm. "I know. I live across the hall." Sophie considered this. "Do you have kids?" "I have a daughter, Lily. She's 7. Sophie's eyes went wide with the specific awe that younger children reserve for older children who exist in a category just beyond their own reach. 7, she breathed. "Soph," Damien said without looking up, "don't interrogate the neighbor." "I'm not interrogating, I'm asking questions." "That's what interrogating is." Emily almost smiled. She collected her mail, a bill, and a coupon circular she'd signed up for because they occasionally had grocery discounts, and went upstairs. She noticed things about him in pieces, the way you notice someone when you're actively trying not to. He left for school, drop-off, at 7:45 every morning, usually with Sophie on his back for the last flight of stairs because apparently this was their system. He got coffee from the cart on the corner rather than the cafe 2 blocks up, which she'd clocked as a cost difference of about $2 per day, which was either habit or deliberate, and with a man who ran an investment firm, she guessed deliberate. He worked from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She knew this because she could hear, very faintly through the wall, the sound of conference calls in a voice that was calm and measured, even when she could make out fragments of sentences like, "That's not what the term sheet says," and "I need that number by end of day." He was different on the phone than he was in the hallway. On the phone, he was precise, controlled, the kind of man who could hold a room just by the tempo of his sentences. In the hallway, he was just tired. A dad who was late for something, whose daughter had opinions about breakfast, who sometimes forgot to bring his keys and had to go back inside. She found that second version considerably easier to deal with. She did not examine why. The first time he offered help, it was small enough that she almost didn't register it as an offer. It was a Wednesday evening, early December, and the building's shared laundry room in the basement had one machine that was perpetually occupied and one that had a quirk where the door didn't seal properly if you didn't press it a specific way while turning the dial. Information that was apparently passed down among tenants by word of mouth, and that Emily had not yet received. She'd lost an entire load because of it. Stood in the basement watching the drum spin dry while her clothes sat unwashed inside a sealed but non-running machine, and said nothing for a long moment because swearing in front of Lily wasn't something she did. Lily was sitting on top of the working machine reading a library book, legs dangling. "Try pressing the left side of the door while you turn the dial," said a voice from the basement doorway. She turned. Damien was standing there with his own laundry bag, Sophie at his side carrying a smaller mesh bag with the focused expression of a child given an important responsibility. "The latch catches wrong," he said. "You have to kind of hold it while you—" He stopped. "Do you want me to show you?" She looked at the machine. She looked at him. "No," she said. "Just tell me where to press." He told her. She pressed. The machine started. "Thank you," she said, in a tone that closed the topic. He nodded like he understood the tone and didn't hold it against her, which somehow made it worse. December came in cold and got colder. Chicago in winter was a full-body experience. The wind off the lake cut through everything. The sidewalks turned treacherous, and the sky went a specific shade of white that felt less like weather and more like a ceiling. Emily's Civic was making a noise that she had categorized and was monitoring. The radiator in her apartment had developed a temperament. The step on the second-floor landing, the one with the rip, had gotten worse. The carpet had partially separated from the tread, and she'd caught it with her foot twice now. And once Lily had stumbled on it, and Emily's heart had done something violent before she'd confirmed Lily was fine. She put in another maintenance request. She did not hold her breath. Her second job, she hadn't mentioned this to anyone in the building because it wasn't their business, was a Thursday evening bookkeeping shift at a small dry cleaning operation 2 neighborhoods over. Owner was a man named Gerald Park, 70 years old, who'd been doing his books by hand in a green ledger for 30 years and had recently been told by his accountant that this was no longer legally sufficient. Emily had found the listing on a community board and offered to set up a basic system for him in exchange for $60 per Thursday. Gerald Park accepted because she charged less than an accountant and because she had shown up to the interview with a printed list of what she planned to do, in order, which impressed him. She was good with numbers. She had always been good with numbers, which was its own particular cruelty given the numbers she was dealing with most days. The Thursday she came home late to find the hallway light outside her door had blown out completely. Not flickering, just out, the socket dark and dead. She stood in the dark for a moment and added it to the list and went inside. Lily was asleep. The babysitter, a 15-year-old girl from the 5th floor named Priya, who charged $8 an hour and was reliable enough that Emily had stopped worrying, had left a note saying Lily had eaten all her dinner and done her homework without being asked. Emily read the note twice, put it on the counter, stood in her kitchen at 11:15 at night, eating the last of the diner's leftover soup she'd brought home in a container and looking at her open laptop where the November ledger was still unclosed because she hadn't had time. The soup had gone cold somewhere on the bus ride home. She ate it anyway. Across the hall, she could see, through the narrow strip of light under her front door, that Damien's lights were still on. She didn't think about that either. It was Lily who made things complicated, the way children will. Lily had taken to Sophie with the quiet intensity she applied to most things she decided she liked. After the mailbox meeting, Lily had asked Emily approximately once a day whether Sophie might come over to play. Emily had said maybe, and then we'll see. And then Lily, I don't know the family, in a tone she used when the real answer was, I don't want to owe anyone anything, even a play date. But children are unimpressed by adult reasoning. On a Saturday afternoon in the second week of December, Emily came out of her apartment to find Lily and Sophie sitting cross-legged in the hallway between their 2 doors, sharing what appeared to be a bag of goldfish crackers and having a very serious conversation about which animals were the most dangerous. Bears, Lily was saying, with the authority of a child who had recently read a library book on the subject. No, Sophie countered. Hippos. My daddy said. Emily looked at them. Then she looked up to find Damien leaning in his doorway with a mug of coffee, watching the same scene with the expression of a man who had fully accepted that his Saturday afternoon was being decided for him by a 6-year-old. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. A pause. I told Sophie she could sit in the hall if she wanted fresh air, he said, which both of them knew was not why Sophie was in the hall. I should have. It's fine, Emily said. I can call her back in if. It's fine. She looked at the 2 girls. Lily was showing Sophie something on a piece of paper, a drawing, from the look of it. Sophie was studying it with the focus of a trained professional evaluating a submission. I just didn't know they'd. Yeah. He sipped his coffee. Sophie's been asking about Lily since the mailroom. Lily's been asking about Sophie since approximately the same time. He almost smiled. It didn't quite land. Something stopped it just before it got there. But it was close enough that she caught it. She's a good kid, he said. About Lily. She is, Emily said, and the simplicity of saying that out loud to someone who was looking at her daughter and actually seeing her did something uncomfortable in the middle of her chest that she refused to investigate. Do you want coffee? He asked. I made too much. I'm fine, she said. It'll just go cold. I'm fine, thank you. She said it cleanly, no edge to it, just the flat fact of it. He accepted this with a small nod that didn't push, and she went back inside and stood in her kitchen for a moment before putting the kettle on. She did not need his coffee. She had her own coffee. It was just that she was out of coffee and had been planning to pick some up on Sunday. She made tea. The notebook was the thing she'd had the longest. It was a regular composition book, black cover, bought years ago at a dollar store, and it was where she kept everything. Every bill, every due date, every repair needed, every balance, every plan. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't a system anyone else would have understood, but it was hers and she trusted it, the way she trusted very few things, completely, and because it had never let her down. November electric, paid. December rent, due first, have it. Lily shoes, need before 20th. Budget, $35 max. Car noise, front left. Monitor, ceiling patch. Waiting on maintenance. Step, second floor. Reported twice. Follow up. Porch light, reported. Nothing. Bookkeeping at Parks. Thursday, $60. She wrote it all down because writing it down made it manageable. A problem on paper was smaller than a problem in her head. She had learned this the way she'd learned most useful things. Because she had to. What she didn't write in the notebook, because it wasn't a problem and it wasn't a number and it had no place in a system, was the way she'd started to notice when Damien's lights went out at night. Not watching, not waiting, just aware of it. The way you become aware of the rhythms of a space you share with other people. He stayed up later than anyone she'd seen, often past midnight. The strip of light under his door would still be on at 12, at 1, sometimes at 1:30. She didn't know if he was working or reading or just not sleeping. She knew the feeling of not sleeping. She did not knock. The second week of December brought a pipe issue on the 4th floor, not her apartment, but adjacent enough that the building's super, a man named Frank who approached all maintenance requests with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had long since stopped believing they would end, ran emergency shut-off notices on the water for 6 hours on a Tuesday. Emily had been warned. She'd filled every container she had. She'd planned for it. What she hadn't planned for was Lily spiking a fever that same Tuesday night. 102.1, the kind that needed watching, fluids, a cool cloth, and the children's acetaminophen being a bottle she'd been meaning to replace for 2 weeks since the last one ran out and had kept putting on the list and not getting to. It was 10:40 at night. The nearest pharmacy was 8 blocks, or a 12-minute drive if her car was reliable, which right now it was choosing not to be, and she'd already spent 20 minutes with it in the parking lot before accepting that tonight it wasn't cooperating. The buses had gone to limited service. She stood in Lily's doorway watching her daughter sleep fitfully, small face flushed and damp, and she thought about the list of options in the way she thought about everything, systematically, unsentimental. The walk was possible, bundled up, fast, back in 40 minutes. She'd done harder things, but she'd have to leave Lily alone. And she did not leave Lily alone. Not even for 20 minutes, not with a fever, not ever. She stood in the doorway for a full 2 minutes. Then she went to the hall. She stood outside 4A. She stood there for what felt like a very long time, which was probably 30 seconds. Then she knocked, quietly, because Sophie was surely asleep. The light was on. She'd seen it. Damien opened the door in 30 seconds. He was awake, still dressed, in jeans and a t-shirt, reading glasses she'd never seen before pushed up on his head. And he took one look at her face and said without preamble, "What do you need?" She hated how direct the question was. She hated more that she didn't have an alternative. "Lily has a fever. I'm out of children's Tylenol. The pharmacy is 8 blocks and I can't leave her." She got it out in one clean sentence, no framing, no apology, no softening. He was already turning back into the apartment. "Sophie had a fever 2 weeks ago. I've got a full bottle." He was in the bathroom cabinet in less than 30 seconds. He came back and held it out. "The grape one. Sophie won't touch the cherry." Emily took it. Her hand was steady. "How much do I owe you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Nothing. I'll replace it." "You don't have to." "I will anyway." She looked at the bottle. "Thank you." "How high?" 102.1. He nodded. That's manageable. Keep fluids going. If it goes above 103, I know, she said. Right. He said it without offense. Yeah, okay. She turned to go. Emily. She turned back. He was leaning against his door frame, arms crossed, looking at her with something she couldn't fully parse. Not pity. She knew what pity looked like, and she'd already decided she would have walked away. Something else, more careful than pity. You can knock, he said. If you need something, you can knock. She didn't say anything for a moment. I know, she said, and she went back inside. She sat next to Lily for the rest of the night and watched the fever break at 3 a.m, and she thought about that sentence, you can knock, with the specific discomfort of someone who had just been offered something she wasn't sure she knew how to accept. She replaced the bottle the following Thursday. She left it outside his door in a plastic bag with no note because she could not think of a note that didn't say either too much or too little. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Sophie holding the bag out, very seriously. My daddy says thank you for the medicine, but you really didn't have to. Emily looked past Sophie to where Damien was visible in the doorway of 4A, pretending to look at his phone with the particular studied casualness of a man absolutely paying attention. Tell your dad I know I didn't have to, Emily said. That's why I did it. Sophie considered this with the face of a diplomat receiving a complex communiqué. Then she nodded once, turned around, and walked back across the hall, and delivered this message in a tone that suggested she understood it was important, even if she wasn't entirely sure why. Emily closed her door. Across the hall, she could have sworn she heard him laugh, just slightly. It was the first time she'd heard that sound. She went back to her notebook and wrote, Doctor visit. Check if Lily needs updated booster. February deadline. Budget for copay. She focused on the notebook. The notebook made sense. The week before Christmas, something happened with the ceiling. The water stain above her kitchen, the one she'd reported, the one that had been on the list since day one, had been slowly evolving in the way that water damage does, spreading incrementally enough that you stopped noticing how much bigger it was getting. She'd been putting a bowl on the counter underneath it during heavy rain as a precaution. On a Wednesday night during a sleet storm, it wasn't a stain anymore. The first drip hit the counter at 8:15. By 8:40, it was a steady, thin stream. She'd emptied the bowl twice. The super's emergency line rang 5 times and went to voicemail. The building management company's after-hours number played her a recording about response time that made her jaw go tight. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table with the focused indifference of a child who trusted her mother to handle things. Emily got every pot and container she owned. She arranged them under the drip. She spread towels. She moved the toaster. Mom, Lily said, this is bad. It's manageable, Emily said. That's what you say when something is actually bad. Emily looked at her daughter. The kid was 7 years old and already could read her like a page. She didn't know whether to be proud of that or worried about it. Probably both. It's manageable, she said again, firmly, and went to get another towel. At 9:15, the drip became 2 drips, and one of them missed the bowl and hit the floor. Emily stood in her kitchen looking at her ceiling, at the growing dark circle above her, at the plaster that had taken on a wet, soft look that she recognized as a precursor to something worse. And she did the calculation the way she always did. Maintenance, unresponsive. Management, unresponsive. Super, voicemail. Cost of emergency plumber, not in the current budget by a margin that made the number almost funny. Temporary options, contain it through the night, call first thing in the morning, push harder. She could do this. She had done harder things than a leaking ceiling. She emptied the bowl again. It was just that it was almost Christmas and her feet hurt, and she hadn't eaten dinner, and the drip had now been joined by a sound, a slow, groaning creak from the subfloor above her that she was choosing not to interpret. She stood in the kitchen at 9:30 in the sleet storm, hands damp, and felt something in the back of her throat that she did not let go any further than that. Then she got a fresh bowl, put it under the drip, moved the chair out of the splash radius. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, homework finished. Emily covered her with the throw blanket, turned off the kitchen light, and went to sit at her laptop and work on Gerald Park's December ledger until she was too tired to stare at numbers. She was good at outlasting things. It was basically the only thing she'd ever been consistently good at. She did not knock on his door that night, but she thought about it once, for about 4 seconds, before she closed the thought down entirely and went back to Gerald Park's Q4 accounts receivable. Some walls don't come down all at once. Some of them just develop cracks, small ones, invisible from the outside, that you can spend months pretending aren't there. Emily Parker was very good at pretending. She was starting to get the feeling, though, that she was running out of time on it. The ceiling dripped through the night. She emptied the bowl 3 more times before morning. And across the hall, the strip of light under Damian Sterling's door stayed on until nearly 2 a.m., the way it always did. Steady and quiet, on the other side of a wall she hadn't yet figured out how to stop noticing. The ceiling got fixed on December 23rd, not by maintenance, not by the building management company, whose after-hours recording Emily had now memorized. It got fixed because Frank the super finally picked up his phone on the 4th call of the morning, heard the words active leak, kitchen ceiling, plaster compromise delivered in a tone that made it clear this was not a request, but a notification of what was about to become his problem, and showed up 90 minutes later with a bucket, a tarp, and a plumber he'd apparently been avoiding calling for 2 weeks on an unrelated issue in Unit 2C. The repair took 4 hours. It was temporary. Frank said the word temporary 3 times, which Emily noted, but it stopped the drip. They patched the plaster. They told her someone would come back in January for the full fix. She wrote it in the notebook. January ceiling. Follow up. She underlined it twice. Christmas itself was quiet. She and Lily had a tree, a small artificial one she'd bought 2 years ago at an after-holiday sale for $11, and she'd put it up the weekend before with the careful cheer she maintained for Lily's sake, the kind that cost something but was worth it. Lily had made ornaments at school out of salt dough and painted them with the specific artistic confidence of a 7-year-old who is not interested in constructive feedback. They were lopsided and wonderful, and Emily hung every single one. She worked Christmas Eve morning. The diner was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that falls over a place when most people have somewhere better to be. She came home at 2 in the afternoon with a container of leftover pie the owner had told her to take, and she and Lily ate pie for lunch and watched 2 movies, and Emily let herself stop running numbers in her head for approximately 3 hours, which was the best gift she could give herself that year. She heard Damien and Sophie leave for somewhere on Christmas morning. She heard the particular sound of Sophie's voice at a higher pitch than usual, which she had come to recognize as excitement, and the lower register of Damien telling her to put her coat on, zip it up, yes, the whole way, Sophie, it's December. She heard them come back 6 hours later, Sophie talking non-stop about something. Damien's responses spaced out in that way of a parent who is listening, but also very tired. She heard the door close. She heard quiet. She thought about what his Christmas looked like, briefly. She shut the thought down. It wasn't her business. New Year's was unremarkable. She worked. She came home. Lily fell asleep before midnight, and Emily sat on the couch with her notebook and a glass of wine she'd found on sale for $6 and wrote out her January budget with the kind of focused attention that other people gave to resolutions. January was going to be tight. The car noise had gotten worse. She wrote, front left tire, likely bearing, get, quote, cannot defer past February. She circled it again. She finished the wine and went to bed. January came in wrong, not gradually wrong, the way months sometimes slip into difficulty. Wrong from the first week, with a particular intensity that felt almost deliberate. The temperature dropped to single digits. The wind chill turned the walk from the bus stop into something that required actual strategy. Which direction to face, how to time it, whether to cut through the parking structure, even though it added 3 minutes because those 3 minutes indoors were worth it. Emily knew the exact calculation. She had run it every day for 2 weeks. The car noise had resolved itself into a diagnosis she'd gotten from a mechanic on January 8th, front left wheel bearing, as she'd suspected, and the quote was $412, which she did not have in a way that made the number almost abstract. She put it in the notebook. She looked at what she could move around. She found a partial answer. She could pull 100 from February's grocery buffer and another 100 from the small emergency fund she'd built over 8 months of not buying anything she didn't absolutely need, and she could ask Gerald Park if he had any extra work in January, and she could pick up 1 additional shift on Saturday mornings at the diner if Carl, the weekend manager, would give it to her. She'd ask on Friday. In the meantime, she drove carefully. She knew the sound it made when she took left turns, and she took them slower now, which added time to every trip, which she absorbed into the schedule the way she absorbed everything, by finding the slack somewhere else. Lily had gotten through the holiday without incident, which was its own kind of victory. The new school had been hard in October, harder in November, and then something had quietly shifted in December. A girl named Mara had decided Lily was someone worth knowing, and Lily had arrived home one Friday with the particular brightness of a child who has just made a real friend. And Emily had stood in the kitchen pretending to sort mail while her eyes did something embarrassing. Sophie had become a fixed feature of their hallway interactions. The two girls had an unofficial arrangement. On weekend mornings, they sat in the hall between the two apartments and operated what could only be described as a small society with its own rules and hierarchies. And Emily and Damien had both tacitly accepted that their doorways were now a shared border zone. They exchanged the words of two people who were in the same orbit without quite being in the same world. Morning, cold out, yeah, the radiator's been doing that thing again. Lily left her mittens by the mailboxes, I put them on your door handle. And it was fine. It was manageable. It was exactly as much as Emily needed it to be. The ice storm came on a Thursday in the third week of January. She knew it was coming. She'd checked the forecast the night before with the specific attention she gave to anything that might affect the logistics of her day. The storm was supposed to start around noon and run through the evening, with ice accumulation of 1/4 to 1/2 inch on exposed surfaces by late afternoon. She'd planned accordingly. She would take the early bus, do her first shift, leave before the worst of it hit, and pick Lily up from school herself at 3. The plan was solid. The plan made sense. What the plan did not account for was the Civic. She'd gone out to the parking lot at 5:50 in the morning to warm it up, which was her habit in winter, and found it unwilling. Not dead. The engine turned over. She could get it running. But the front left was worse than it had been, and the sound it made when she tried to back out of the space was the kind of sound that even someone who wasn't a mechanic would recognize as a car telling you something important. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. She assessed. She drove to work anyway, slowly, and took every turn wider than necessary, and parked in the lot 2 blocks from the diner because it was flat and didn't require a left turn to exit. She got through the morning shift. The storm started at 11:30, earlier than forecast and heavier. By the time she was supposed to leave at 1, the parking lot was a sheet of pale ice, and the temperature had dropped 6 degrees in 3 hours. She stood at the diner window and watched the street turn treacherous and made the decision without drama. She would drive to the school, slowly, take the service roads that avoided the worst intersections, and she would be fine. She was on Clover Avenue, 4 blocks from Lily's school, when the car made the sound that ended the debate. It wasn't a gradual sound. It was sudden and low and definitive, and the car pulled hard left in the same moment, and Emily had just enough experience to steer into it rather than against it, and bring the Civic to a stop at the side of the road without hitting anything. She sat for a moment. She turned it off. She turned it back on. The engine ran fine. The wheel bearing did not. She looked at the dashboard. She looked at the street. Empty, because nobody with options was out in this. Ice on the road, ice on the sidewalk. The temperature at 9 degrees with a wind that made it feel like -5. She was 4 blocks from the school, and she had no way to get the car to move safely. She called the school first. Mrs. Huang answered. Lily would be kept in the after-school room, safe and warm, until Emily got there, or arranged pickup. Emily said she'd be there within the hour. She didn't know exactly how, but she said it. She called a tow truck. The operator put her on hold for 11 minutes, then told her the earliest available was 2 to 3 hours. She wrote the number in her notebook, the tow company, the reference number for the call, with hands that were starting to feel the cold through her gloves because she'd been standing outside the car for 10 minutes by then, assessing options. And the wind was doing what Chicago wind does in January, which is find every gap and commit to it. She had 1 coat. She was wearing it. She had a scarf. She had gloves. She was a reasonable adult who had dressed for the morning weather, not for standing on a frozen road for an indeterminate period of time. She was calculating the walk, 4 blocks to get Lily, then walk back to wait for the tow, find somewhere warm in the interim, figure out how to get Lily home, when she heard a car slow down beside her. She didn't look at first. She had a policy about strange cars pulling up next to a woman alone on an empty road. Emily? She looked. It was Damien's car. A dark gray SUV that she'd seen in the parking lot, but never thought much about. And he was leaning across to the passenger side window with Sophie visible in the back seat, still in her school coat, which meant he'd just done pickup. My car broke down, she said before he could ask. I can see that. He looked at the Civic, then back at her. Get in. I'll take you to the school. I have a tow coming. When? 2 to 3 hours. He looked at her. She looked at him. The wind pushed between them with no interest in the conversation. Get in, he said. I'll take you to get Lily. We'll come back and wait for the tow somewhere that has heat. I can wait here. It's 9 degrees. I'm aware. Emily. His voice didn't rise. It didn't push. It was just very calm and very direct. Get in the car. She stood there for 3 more seconds. She was aware of the seconds. She counted them without meaning to. And then she opened the passenger door and got in. The heat hit her immediately. She hadn't realized how cold she'd gotten until warmth became a physical fact again. She kept her face neutral. Hi, Emily, Sophie said from the back seat, with the pleasant adaptability of a child who finds nothing unusual about the situation. Hi, Sophie. Why was your car stopped on the road? It broke. Sophie considered this. Cars do that sometimes. Our old car did that once. Daddy said a word I'm not supposed to say. Sophie, Damien said, I didn't say the word. I just said that you said it. Emily looked out the window. They drove the 4 blocks to the school in silence that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. Just the silence of 2 people who have something to say and are both choosing not to say it. He pulled up to the front entrance. She was out of the car before it fully stopped. Lily was in the after-school room, coloring, with the focused calm of a child who trusted her mother completely and was therefore not worried. She looked up when Emily came in, registered that Emily was there, and said, I thought you'd come. Mrs. Huang said your car broke. It did. Emily crouched down to her. You okay? I finished my worksheet and I drew a horse. She held it up. The horse was anatomically interpretive but confident. Can we keep it? We keep everything, Emily said. They went back to the car. Lily climbed in next to Sophie with the easy naturalness of 2 children who have already established diplomatic relations, and the backseat conversation resumed immediately at a volume that suggested 4 blocks was more than enough time. Do you like horses? Lily asked Sophie. I like elephants better, Sophie said. They remember things. Horses are fast, though. Elephants are strong. Both are good, Lily said generously. In different ways. Emily looked at the window. Damien drove back to the Civic. He pulled up behind it and put the hazards on. The street was still empty, still glazed. The ice had gotten worse in the 20 minutes they'd been gone. I can wait here with you, he said. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to. He said it without inflection, just fact. The girls can wait in the car. It'll be warmer. Damien, I've got nowhere to be. He looked at her. I work from home on Thursdays. I was done by noon. He paused. You're not inconveniencing me. That's not what this is. She looked at the Civic sitting frozen and useless at the side of the road. She looked at her daughter in the back seat, already deep in conversation with Sophie about elephants. She looked at the ice on the road and the wind moving through the bare branches of the one tree on this particular block, and the temperature reading on his dashboard, which had dropped another degree since they'd left the school. Fine, she said. Thank you. He nodded. He turned the heat up 1 notch. He didn't say anything else, which she appreciated more than she knew how to express. The tow truck came in 90 minutes, which was faster than promised. Damien waited the entire time. He didn't try to fill the silence with small talk, which was the thing she'd feared most about this situation. The obligation of conversation as payment for help. He just sat there with the engine running and the radio on low and let the time pass the way it passed. And she found, somewhere around the 40-minute mark, that the tension in her shoulders had dropped approximately half an inch. She negotiated with the tow truck driver while Damien stayed in the car with the girls. She got the car loaded. She got the contact information for the shop. She asked the right questions, got the right numbers, made the arrangements. When she came back to the SUV, she had the shop's address written in her notebook and a confirmation that they could look at it tomorrow morning. "All set?" Damien asked. "All set." She buckled her seatbelt. "The shop's on Halstead. They can see it tomorrow." "You need a ride tomorrow?" "I'll take the bus." He didn't push it. She'd expected him to push it, and when he didn't, she wasn't sure what to do with that. He dropped them off at the building. She got Lily upstairs, made hot chocolate, the kind from a packet. Not the fancy kind, but Lily didn't know the difference and loved it, and sat at the kitchen table while Lily told her about the horse drawing in detail, and she listened and wrote to $85, shop diagnostic, $50 deposit, bearing repair total, $412, minus deposit, in the notebook, and stared at the number until it stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a problem. Problems had solutions. It was walls that didn't. She would find the solution. She always did. She was good at it. She was so good at it that most days she didn't notice how exhausting it was. The car was back on Monday, $408, $4 less than the quote, which felt like a joke, but she took it. She'd pulled from 3 places and asked Gerald Park on Friday about extra January work, and he'd said yes without hesitating, and Carl at the diner had given her the Saturday morning shift, and she'd done the math 3 times until it came out to something that worked. Barely, if nothing else went wrong in February. She picked the car up herself, took the bus to Halstead, signed the paperwork, drove home carefully on roads that were sanded now but still cautious-worthy. She didn't tell Damien any of this. It wasn't his business. He'd helped with the tow. That was enough. That was more than enough. She didn't need a running account. But she noticed that Monday evening that when she came back from picking up the car, there was a paper bag hanging from her door handle. She took it inside. She opened it. It was a bag of coffee. The specific brand she bought when she could afford the brand she actually liked, which was not every week. And a small note, not a card, just a torn piece of paper, handwritten, fast and slightly uneven, like someone who'd written it standing up. "For the record, you handled that better than I would have. D." She stood in the kitchen holding the bag and the note for longer than she intended. She put the note in the back of the notebook. She didn't examine why. She made coffee. February moved the way Chicago February always does, grudgingly, incrementally, with occasional false hints of warmth that it snatched back inside 48 hours. Emily's schedule held, the ceiling held, the car held. She ran her lists, worked her shifts, balanced Gerald Park's books, read to Lily on the night she got home before 9, and maintained the precise internal architecture that kept everything from becoming too much all at once. Damien was still there. That was the only way to put it. He was simply still there, in the way that the hallway was still there, and the sound of the radiator was still there, and the strip of light under his door was still there past midnight. She had stopped pretending she didn't notice. She had simply reclassified the noticing as neutral information. He was her neighbor. She was aware of her neighbor. This was not a complicated situation. She told herself this on a number of occasions. The girls had escalated their hallway arrangement into something that now occasionally involved supervised visits inside one apartment or the other. Sophie had come to 4B twice to look at Lily's horse drawing, and then because they were reading the same library book series and apparently needed to discuss it in person. Lily had been to 4A once, on a Saturday, and had come back reporting that Damien made the best grilled cheese she'd ever had, which Emily received with the careful neutrality of a woman who was not going to ask follow-up questions. She did not ask follow-up questions. She did, however, buy a slightly better cheese at the grocery store that week, for no particular reason. The thing that started to wear on her in February wasn't any single problem. It was the accumulation. She'd been accumulating for a long time, the unpaid bills that had half-lives, the repairs that her body absorbed instead of the apartment, the step that still hadn't been fixed, which she now navigated around by feel. The porch light that was still out, which she'd stopped thinking about because thinking about it didn't help. The radiator that clanked through the night with the independence of something that answered to no one. The smallness of her grocery runs, measured not by want but by precise necessity. The Saturday mornings she worked now instead of spending with Lily, and how she'd started waking up early on Sunday to make a real breakfast. Eggs, toast, Sometimes pancakes if the batter came together right. Because Sunday mornings were the things she was protecting, and she wasn't going to let even her own exhaustion take that. She was good at protecting things. She was getting tired of how much of her energy it required. On a Tuesday in mid-February, she came home from a double shift to find that the step on the second-floor landing, the one she'd reported, the one she'd followed up on twice, the one she navigated by feel, had caught Lily. Not badly. Lily had been coming home with Priya, the babysitter, and had caught her foot on the separated carpet edge and gone down on one knee. She was fine, a scraped knee, slightly teary, more startled than hurt. Priya had already cleaned it and put a bandage on it by the time Emily got home, and Lily was sitting at the kitchen table with her homework and a juice box and the expression of a kid who had decided to be stoic about it. Emily looked at the bandage. She looked at Lily's face. She asked 3 questions: where, how, does it hurt? And got 3 answers. And she held it together through all of this because Lily needed her to. Then she went into the bathroom and stood at the sink for about 30 seconds with the water running. She did not cry. She was clear on that. She didn't. She just stood there with the water running and her hands on the edge of the sink and breathed through the specific feeling of a person who is very tired and trying not to show it, who is running a household on willpower and spreadsheets and whatever personal reserves haven't been spent yet, and who has just watched her kid get hurt by a thing she'd tried 4 times to get fixed and couldn't. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She went back out and helped Lily finish her homework. After Lily was asleep, she called the building management company. She was put on hold for 8 minutes. The person who answered was not the same person she'd spoken to the last 2 times. So she told the story again from the beginning: the step, the report dates, the follow-up calls, Lily's injury. And she wrote the date and the name and the reference number in the notebook while she spoke. And she told them she would be following up in writing tomorrow, and that if the step wasn't repaired by the end of the week, she would be contacting the city housing inspector's office. She said this in a voice that was flat and specific and left no room for interpretation. The building maintenance crew came on Thursday. She went out to check it when she heard them on the landing. 2 men with a staple gun and new carpet tack, and about 40 minutes of work. 40 minutes of work for a problem she'd been reporting for 4 months. She watched them finish. She thanked them in a tone that thanked no one. She went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open and a pen in her hand, and she looked at the list. The ceiling, fixed. The step, fixed, finally. The porch light, still out. The radiator, still clanking, manageable. The car, repaired, holding. The February budget, balanced, barely. She looked at the list for a long time. Then she turned to a fresh page and started the March plan. She was good at this. She was going to keep being good at this. The trouble was that she was starting to have moments, brief, unwelcome moments, usually late at night when the building was quiet and Lily was asleep and the notebook was closed, where the arithmetic of her life didn't feel like strategy anymore, where it felt like something closer to survival. And survival, she knew, was not the same thing as living. She didn't let that thought stay long. She was practiced at not letting things stay that she hadn't planned for. But it was there. It was there on the night in late February when she was sitting at her kitchen table at 11:40, working through Gerald Park's February receivables on her laptop, and she heard the sound of a door across the hall, and then, a few minutes later, a quiet knock. She went still. It wasn't demanding. It was actually quite light. The knock of someone who wasn't sure if you were awake and didn't want to disturb you if you weren't. She got up. She opened the door. Damien was standing in the hall in a t-shirt and sweats, which meant he'd been working late and hadn't bothered to dress for anything, which meant this wasn't a planned thing. He was holding 2 mugs. One of them had steam coming off it. "I saw the light under your door," he said. "I made too much coffee again." She looked at the mugs. She looked at him. She was aware that her hair was in a knot on top of her head, and she was wearing a sweatshirt that had a faded logo on it from a 5K she'd done 3 years ago. And she hadn't thought about any of this until this exact moment, which was annoying. "I'm working," she said. "I know. I'm working too." He held out the second mug. "You don't have to talk. It's late, and I thought—" He stopped. He seemed to decide something. "Take the coffee, Emily." She stood in the doorway. Her laptop was open on the table behind her. Gerald Park's February numbers were not going to close themselves. She took the mug. "Thank you," she said. "Yeah." A pause that wasn't awkward so much as it was careful. "Sophie told me about Lily's knee," he said. "I was going to ask, but I didn't want to, She's fine. It's fine. I got the step fixed. I heard them on the landing." 4 months, she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice and didn't smooth it out. 4 months and 4 calls, and it took Lily falling before they sent anyone. He looked at her. He didn't tell her that wasn't right, or that she should have pushed harder, or offer any of the useless things people said when they wanted to look helpful. He just said, "That's garbage." "Yes," she said. "It is." He leaned against the doorframe. She stayed in hers. The hallway between them was maybe 4 feet wide. "You do everything yourself," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just something he'd been watching and was now saying. She looked at the coffee in her hands. "Most people do." "No," he said. "They don't. Most people ask for help when things get hard. Most people have someone to ask." He was quiet for a moment. "You have someone to ask," he said. "You just don't." She looked up at him. He was looking back at her with the particular steadiness she'd noticed in him from the beginning. The way he absorbed things without reacting, the way he waited rather than pushing. It was different from indifference. It was almost its opposite. "I don't do that," she said. "I know." "I'm not going to." "I know that too." He said it without heat, without frustration. "I'm not asking you to, I'm just saying that the option is there." He straightened up. "I should let you finish your work." "Yeah." She looked at the mug. "This is good coffee. I finally found a decent brand." He turned toward his door. "Night, Emily." "Good night." She went back inside. She sat down at the laptop. She looked at Gerald Park's February receivables for a moment without seeing them. Then she looked at the mug in her hands. Warm, solid, the kind of ordinary physical fact that shouldn't mean anything. And she thought about what he'd said. "You have someone to ask. You just don't." She went back to work. She closed the February books at 12:40. She washed both mugs, hers and his, and left his on the counter to return in the morning. She put herself to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about the word someone, about how long it had been since she'd used it in reference to anyone specific, about how strange it was to have it offered, quietly, with a mug of coffee and no expectation attached. She was almost asleep when she caught herself thinking that she didn't actually hate that it had been offered. She filed that thought in the category of things she was not going to investigate. And then she fell asleep, in the cold, quiet apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Clover Street, to the sound of the radiator doing its thing and the faint, almost imperceptible awareness of another light still on the other side of the wall. March came in the way it always did in Chicago. Not quite winter, not quite anything else. The sky the color of old dishwater, and the air carrying the particular smell of ice that was thinking about melting, but hadn't decided yet. The city existed in a kind of suspended state, and Emily existed inside it the same way she existed inside most things, moving forward because stopping wasn't an option, not because the road was clear. She had settled into something with Damien that she didn't have a word for and wasn't going to look for one. It was the coffee sometimes. It was the hallway. It was the easy shorthand they'd developed around the girls. "Sophie left her book on your mat. I put it inside. Lily's looking for her blue hair tie. Is it possible it ended up at yours?" "Yeah, I'll tell her." It was the way he'd started leaving the stairwell light on when he heard her coming home late, which she only knew because she'd never had to fumble for the switch since January, and she'd noticed. She hadn't said anything about it. He hadn't mentioned it. That was the arrangement. What it wasn't, she was very clear about, was anything that required examination. He was her neighbor. He was someone she trusted approximately as much as she trusted anyone, which was not a high bar historically, but felt significant given that the bar existed at all. That was the full extent of it. She kept it there by maintenance, the same way she kept everything running, by not letting things accumulate past the point she could manage. The problem with that theory was that things were accumulating anyway, in the small, unglamorous ways that real life uses when it's making a point. It was the Saturday in early March when she came home from her morning shift and found that the porch light outside 4B, the one that had been out since December, the one she'd reported and re-reported and eventually stopped expecting anything about, had been replaced. She stood in the hallway outside her door and looked at the fixture. It was on. Clean, steady light, the new bulb slightly brighter than the old one had been. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Damien's door. She knocked. He answered in about 10 seconds, which meant he'd been nearby. He was in jeans and an old flannel shirt, and he had a small smear of something on his forearm that looked like it might be caulk, which told her the light hadn't been the only thing he'd been doing this morning. "You replaced my porch light," she said. "The socket was corroded," he said. "The bulb would have kept burning out. I had the right socket in my kit, so I swapped it." "Damien, it took 20 minutes. That's not—" She stopped. She tried a different approach. "Did you go into my side of the hall while I wasn't home? The fixture's in the shared hallway. Technically, it's between our two doors." He said this with the steady neutrality of a man who had prepared for this particular objection. "I didn't go inside your apartment." She looked at him. He looked back at her with an expression that was almost the face of a man waiting to see which way a coin would land. "You should have asked," she said. "If I asked, you'd have said you'd handle it." "Because I would have handled it." "In another 4 months, maybe," he said, and there was no edge to it, no implication she needed to be rescued, just the flat observation of someone who had been paying attention. "It's a light, Emily. You shouldn't be coming home to a dark hallway." She stood there in the corridor with the new light on above her and the specific frustration of a person who cannot find the correct argument because the other person isn't actually wrong. "I'll reimburse you for the socket," she said. "You really won't." "Damien." "Emily." He said her name the way he sometimes did, quietly, with the patience of someone who had apparently decided to be immovable about this particular thing. "Let me buy you a $3 socket part. That's all it was." She looked at the light. She looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, finally, in the tone of someone conceding a point they're not entirely happy about. "You're welcome, Ed," he said, without the satisfaction of someone who'd won anything. She went inside. She stood in her kitchen. She looked at the notebook on the counter and thought about writing porch light, fixed and crossing it off the list, and then thought about the fact that she hadn't fixed it, and then thought about how that should bother her more than it did. It bothered her. It just bothered her slightly less than she expected. That was new. Mads. 2 days later, she came home to find him on the second-floor landing with a small toolbox, tightening the bolts on the newly recarpeted step that maintenance had finally fixed in February. She stopped on the stair below and watched him for a moment. He hadn't heard her coming. He was focused on what he was doing with the particular concentration of someone who had done this kind of work enough times to know that doing it halfway wasn't worth doing. "The step was already fixed," she said. He looked up. He didn't startle. The carpet tack they used was stapled wrong on the left side. It was going to catch again in a month. He looked back down, set the last bolt. "I used proper screws." "Did maintenance know you were doing that?" "Frank knows I have tools and occasionally use them," he said. "He pretends not to know. We have an understanding." She came up to the landing. She looked at the step. It was solid, properly solid, the way it hadn't been even before the carpet started separating. "How long has this been bothering you?" she asked. "Since Lily fell," he said simply, and stood up and closed the toolbox. She didn't say anything for a moment. He had the decency not to look at her while she was processing that. He picked up the toolbox, gave the step one more look with the assessing eye of someone checking their own work, and turned to head upstairs. "Damien," she said. He stopped. "Why?" she asked. It came out more direct than she'd planned. She meant the light and the step and the socket and the coffee and the car and all of it, accumulated. He turned. He looked at her with a kind of steadiness she'd come to recognize in him. Not performed calm, just the genuine article, the kind of stillness that comes from being very sure of something. "Because it needed doing," he said, "and because I could." It wasn't a romantic answer. It wasn't a calculated one. It was just true, stated simply, and that was what made it hard to argue with. She nodded once. He went upstairs. She followed a few steps behind. In the hallway, their doors across from each other, they went to their respective apartments without further conversation. She went inside. She put her keys on the hook. She sat on the couch and didn't reach for the notebook immediately, which was unusual, and she sat with that for a moment, with the unfamiliar stillness of a woman who has nowhere to put something she received but wasn't looking for. The Saturday that changed things arrived without announcing itself, the way pivotal moments usually do. Emily had come home at noon from the morning diner shift, and the plan, she always had a plan, was laundry in the afternoon, grocery run in the early evening, get ahead on Gerald Park's March books before Sunday, make sure Lily's permission slip for the class trip was signed and in the backpack. Standard. Contained. Manageable. What derailed the plan was not a crisis for once. It was just a sink. She'd noticed for 2 weeks that the cold water tap in her bathroom was taking longer to respond. A slow, gritty turn before the water came, like the cartridge inside was wearing out. She'd been meaning to look at it. She'd looked at a YouTube tutorial. She knew what the problem was, and she knew she could fix it herself with a replacement cartridge, which cost about $8.40 if she was lucky, more if the pipes were as opinionated as the rest of the apartment tended to be. She had bought the cartridge. It was on the bathroom counter. She had her Saturday afternoon. She started the job at 1:15. She had the water shut off under the sink, the tap handle removed, the retaining clip out, and then the old cartridge, which had apparently decided that its years of service entitled it to permanent residence, refused to move. She tried the correct technique. She tried the adjusted technique. She tried the technique she'd seen in a second video that contradicted the first video. By 2 o'clock, she had the bathroom floor covered in a towel, both hands scraped from the metal edge of the fixture cavity, and a cartridge that had not moved a millimeter. She sat back on her heels. She looked at the tap assembly laid out on the towel beside her. She was aware of a specific internal feeling that she associated with problems that were costing her more time than she had allocated, and she breathed through it. Lily appeared in the bathroom doorway. "Is it fixed?" "Not yet." Lily looked at the parts. She looked at her mother's hands. "Do you need help?" "I'm fine." "Sophie's dad has tools," Lily said, with the innocent directness of someone who has not yet learned that offering a solution and giving advice are different things. "Lily." "He fixed the step." "Lily." "He's home. I can hear his music." She said this last part with the particular factual delivery of a child who has no idea she's dismantling something. "He plays it on Saturdays when he's not on the phone." Emily looked at the unmovable cartridge. She looked at her scraped hands. She looked at Lily. "Go watch your show," she said. Lily went, unhurried, having delivered her information and apparently confident it would be used correctly. Emily spent another 15 minutes on the cartridge. At 2:25, with cold water shut off, a bathroom she couldn't fully reassemble without the new part installed, and a Saturday afternoon that was starting to have opinions about her, she sat on the bathroom floor and acknowledged, only to herself, in the privacy of her own head, that she was stuck. She did not like being stuck. Being stuck meant needing something. Needing something meant asking. Asking meant owing. She knew this sequence the way she knew her own address. She'd built her entire adult life around not reaching that last step. She also knew, sitting on the bathroom floor with scraped hands and a tap that wouldn't come apart, that she could wait until Monday and call a plumber at a cost she could not absorb this week, or she could wait and use only the hot water tap until the cartridge surrendered, which was possible but genuinely inconvenient, or she could knock on the door across the hall. She sat with that for about 60 seconds. Then she got up, dried her hands on the towel, and went to the hall. She knocked on 4A. Damien opened it in about 15 seconds. He was in the same flannel he'd been wearing the other day. She was starting to think it was his default Saturday shirt. And yes, she could hear the faint sound of music from inside, some kind of low-key instrumental that she wasn't going to think about. "The bathroom tap," she said. "Cold water cartridge. I have the part, but I can't get the old one out. I've watched 2 tutorials. It's not moving." He looked at her for a moment. "Do you have a cartridge puller?" he asked. "A what?" "It's a specific tool for removing tap cartridges. Most tutorials assume you have one." She stared at him. "That's apparently what I'm missing." "Yeah." He reached back inside. She heard him tell Sophie he'd be across the hall for a few minutes, heard Sophie say okay without looking up from whatever she was doing, and he came out with the toolbox. "Show me." She showed him. He looked at the assembly. He looked at the cartridge. He reached into the toolbox and produced a tool she'd never seen before. Small, U-shaped, built specifically for the job. And in approximately 4 minutes, with a noise that suggested the cartridge had strong objections but insufficient leverage, it came out. He handed it to her. She held the old cartridge and looked at it with the feeling she usually reserved for things that had cost her significantly more than they should have. "Here," he said, taking the new one from the counter and fitting it in, working through the reconnection with quick, practiced movements. "You've done this before," she said. "My apartment has the same fixtures." He tightened the retaining clip. "My tap did the same thing about a year ago. I ordered the puller tool because I wasn't going through that twice." He glanced up briefly. "Should have told you I had it. I didn't ask." "No," he said. "You didn't." He said it without accusation, and she heard it without defensiveness, which was itself a small milestone that neither of them noted out loud. He finished the job in 20 minutes total. He ran the tap, checked for drips, ran it again. Solid, clean. The cold water came on immediately, no grinding. "Thank you," she said. "No problem." He started putting the tools back. "Damien." She stopped. She'd been saying his name as a preface to arguments a lot lately, and she was aware of the pattern. "I mean it. Thank you." He looked up. He seemed to hear the difference in it, the version without the argument attached. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He picked up the toolbox and she walked him to the door, and they stood for a moment in the doorway with the slightly awkward quality of two people who have just been inside a small room together for 20 minutes and are recalibrating. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why do you still live here?" She meant the building. She meant the walk-up with the opinionated radiators and the maintenance that required escalation and the carpet rip that had finally been fixed in month 4. Sterling capital. You could live anywhere. He considered the question. She could tell he'd been asked it before, probably by Mrs. Calvo, at minimum, because he didn't look surprised, just thoughtful. "When Claire and I split," he said, it was the first time he'd said his ex-wife's name to her, and he said it easily, which told her the wound had scar tissue on it by now. "I needed somewhere that felt like a real building, not a tower, not a service elevator, and a doorman who knows your name because his job requires it." He looked at the hallway. "I wanted Sophie to grow up in a place where she heard neighbors through the walls and knew Mrs. Calvo's business, and had to take actual stairs." He paused. "Also, I didn't want to spend the year shopping for apartments." "That's a very practical second reason," she said. "I'm a practical person." "You have a cartridge puller tool." "Exactly." He almost smiled. It landed this time. She felt it in the general region of her chest, which she ignored. "Good luck with the laundry," he said, which meant he'd heard her talking to Lily about the Saturday plan earlier, through the shared wall, and had probably said that to stop whatever was happening in the doorway from developing further. She recognized the move because she'd made it herself approximately 40 times in the last 4 months. "Thanks," she said, and closed the door. The Saturday 2 weeks after the tap was the one that she would think about later, turning it over the way you turn over something that changed the shape of things and trying to find the exact moment it did. She had been at the diner since 6. It had been a bad shift. Not dramatically bad, just the kind of grinding bad that a 12-hour stretch on your feet with 2 call-outs and a table that sent back 3 orders and tipped 11% can produce. She came home at 6:30 to a building that was quiet in the early evening way, took the stairs by memory because she could have done it in her sleep at this point, and turned the corner on the 4th-floor landing. She stopped. Outside her door, Damien was crouched down at the base of her doorframe with a tube of weather-stripping adhesive and a strip of new door seal. Reattaching the bottom draft seal that she'd noticed 3 weeks ago was pulling away from the frame, and that she'd put on the list under non-urgent because the cold was retreating and it could wait until next fall. He hadn't heard her yet. He was focused on pressing the strip flat, working section by section with the patience of someone who knew that rushing weather stripping was how you ended up doing it twice. She stood at the top of the stairs and looked at him. She looked at the toolbox open to his right. She looked at the fresh strip, straight and even, fitted properly against the frame. She looked at the light above her door, the one he'd fixed in March, steady and clean. She thought about the step on the second floor, solid now under her feet every day. She thought about the tap in the bathroom and the cold water that came on immediately. She thought about the Tylenol in December and the coffee at midnight and the note in her notebook. You handled that better than I would have. That she'd told herself she was keeping for no particular reason. She thought about 4 months of a man fixing things in the perimeter of her life, quietly, without asking for anything back, without making it a transaction, without turning any of it into something she owed. She'd been waiting for the catch. She'd been so sure there was a catch. There was always a catch. He still hadn't heard her. She said, "Damien." He looked up. He wasn't startled, but he went still in the way of someone who's been found doing something they knew would start a conversation. "The draft seal was pulling off," he said. "Cold drafts coming in. You'd feel it again in October if nobody fixed it." "It's March," she said. "Good time to fix it." She looked at him. He looked at her. The hallway was very quiet. "Come inside," she said. He blinked. She could tell he hadn't been expecting that. "Let me finish it. Then come inside." She unlocked her door. "I'll make coffee." She went in. She heard him finish the seal. 3 more minutes of careful pressure, she could tell from the sound of it. She put the kettle on. She got 2 mugs down from the cabinet, the good ones, not the chipped ones she used most mornings. She stood at the counter and looked at the kitchen. The water stain on the ceiling that was fully patched now, the radiator quiet for once, the tap that ran clean. And she waited. He knocked on the open door. "Okay to come in?" "Yeah." He came in. He set the toolbox by the door with the practiced habit of someone who didn't want to track anything in. He looked around her kitchen in the way of someone seeing it for the first time from the inside, which it was. She'd never had him in the apartment before. Not through the door, not past the threshold. It was small. She knew it was small. There was the kitchen table she'd bought secondhand, 1 chair slightly uneven, a stack of library books on one end where Lily had left them, the notebook open to the March plan page, Gerald Park's folder of papers she'd been intending to sort tonight. She turned away to pour the water. "This is the first time you've let me in," he said. Not an accusation, just something he'd noticed. "You've never been in before because I didn't need anything fixed inside before," she said. "You needed the tap fixed. That's different. The bathroom is... You were focused on the..." She stopped. She turned around with both mugs and looked at him. He was looking back at her with the expression she recognized as him waiting, giving her space to get where she was going without pushing. "I know what I do," she said. "I keep people at the door. I'm aware of that." "Okay," he said. "I'm not apologizing for it. I'm not asking you to. I just..." She stopped again. She put the mugs on the table. She sat down in one of the chairs, and he took the other, and they were at the kitchen table like 2 normal people having coffee on a Saturday evening, except that nothing about this felt entirely normal. "I've been trying to figure out what you want," she said. Straight, no softening. "From all of this. The light, the step, the tap, the coffee, all of it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I know you have." "And?" He put both hands around his mug. "I don't want anything from you, Emily. I'm not building a tab." He looked at the table. "Sophie's mother left because I worked too much and wasn't present enough, and she was right on both counts. I spent a year after that being very productive and very alone and very sure I was fine." He looked up. "And then you moved in across the hall, and you were doing everything by yourself, all the time, and never asking anyone for anything, and I recognized it." He paused. "Not from Sophie's mother, from myself. From the version of me that thought needing help was a weakness I could organize my way out of." The kitchen was quiet. The radiator didn't even clank. "You fixed your things," she said. "Professionally, I outsourced everything personal." He said it with a flat honesty that she respected. "I have a building manager for my office. I have an assistant. I have a lawyer and an accountant and a financial advisor. I built an entire infrastructure around not having to need anyone directly. He picked up his mug, put it back down. And then I had to learn how to be a real parent, and I couldn't outsource that. And it turned out I was basically starting from zero. He looked at her. Sophie taught me more about being a person in 2 years than I learned in the decade before. Emily looked at him. He looked like someone who had not said that out loud very many times and was not entirely sure how it landed. "She's a good kid," Emily said. "She really is." He said it with the simple, bottomless sincerity of a parent, and she felt the truth of it land the same way she felt it when someone said it about Lily. "The first week we lived here," Emily said slowly, "I heard you through the wall. You were on a call, and you were telling someone that the term sheet was wrong, and your voice was completely different from your hallway voice. It was like you were a different person." He raised an eyebrow. "Was that unsettling?" "No, I understood it." She turned the mug in her hands. "I do the same thing. The diner voice, the building management voice, the Gerald Park Thursday bookkeeper voice." She paused. "None of them are lies. They're just the version of me that can handle the thing in front of her." "What's the voice you're using right now?" he asked. She thought about it. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. He nodded. He seemed to find this answer acceptable. They sat for a moment in the quiet. "Why Thursdays?" he said. "The bookkeeping job. You come home late on Thursdays. It pays $60, and I needed $60. Does he know he's getting a bargain? Gerald? He knows I charge less than an accountant. He doesn't know what I need the money for, and that's not his business." "How many things are you running simultaneously?" he asked. "Right now, in terms of financial plates." She looked at him. He looked back. "Too many for you to need to know about," she said. Not hostile, just true. "That's fair." He accepted it without pushing. "I'm asking because He stopped. He seemed to decide something, or redecide it, or decide how to say it. "I run an investment firm. I spend 10 hours a day thinking about money and how to move it and where it needs to go. I know what it looks like when someone is good at managing difficult numbers." He paused. "You're genuinely good at it, Emily. Better than people I pay serious money to." She looked at him. "That's a strange compliment." "It's the one I mean." He held her gaze. "You know your own books better than most CFOs I've worked with. The question you asked the tow truck company about the mechanical lien on your car, that was the right question, and most people don't know enough to ask it." "I had to learn," she said. "Most people don't bother. Most people have someone else to handle it." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "There's that." The coffee was getting cooler. Lily was at the school's Saturday art program until 7:30, which had seemed like an impossible luxury when the program coordinator had offered the scholarship slot, and Emily had sat with her pride for exactly one evening before writing the acceptance email. Sophie was with a friend 2 floors down. Sophie had somehow accumulated an impressive social network for a 6-year-old, and Damien managed it with the scheduling system of someone running a small organization. They were 2 adults at a kitchen table with 40 minutes and no particular performance required. "My ex-wife used to say I was emotionally unavailable," Damien said, out of nowhere, or not out of nowhere, out of the conversation they'd been building for 4 months without naming it. "She wasn't wrong. I was present in every logistical way and absent in the ways that matter." He looked at the mug. "I've thought about that a lot, about what available actually means." "What did you come up with?" Emily asked. "That it's not about grand gestures," he said. "It's about whether you show up for the small things, consistently." He paused. "The light, the step, the tap, those aren't... I wasn't doing those to impress you. I want to be clear about that." "I know," she said. And she did. That was the thing she'd finally accepted somewhere between the tap and the weather stripping, that there was no agenda. That was the most disarming part of him. She could defend against an agenda. She didn't know what to do with someone who simply, genuinely noticed what needed doing and did it. "What happened?" he asked. "If you want to tell me, the reason you run everything alone." She looked at the table, at the notebook with its lists and its numbers and the margin of her March plan. "Lily's father," she said. "We were together 4 years. He was reliable right until the moment he wasn't, and the moment he wasn't happened to be when Lily was 3 months old and I was 3 weeks back at work and we had rent due. She said it flat, factual, the way you tell a story you've carried long enough that the emotion has compressed into just the facts of it. He didn't leave dramatically. He just stopped being there, bit by bit. Until one day I realized I hadn't been able to count on him for 6 months, and I'd been managing without noticing because I was used to managing. That's a brutal way to find out, Damien said quietly. The worst part wasn't him, she said. The worst part was that I should have seen it, and I didn't. I was so busy keeping everything moving that I missed the thing that mattered. She looked up. So I decided that the safest thing was to be the only person responsible for any of it, because if I was the only person, I couldn't miss it. He was quiet. He didn't offer the standard responses, the "that makes sense" or the "you're so strong." He just sat with it. That logic works, he said finally, right up until it stops working. I know, she said. Is it stopping? She looked at him across the kitchen table, at the lines around his eyes that came from not enough sleep and too much screen time, and the particular exhaustion of someone who loves a small child more than they know what to do with. At the flannel shirt and the way he held his coffee mug in both hands like it was the one warm thing in a cold room. Possibly, she said. He nodded, slowly. I've been trying not to. She stopped, restarted. I don't know how to do this, whatever this is. I've been running alone for so long that I don't know if I remember how to run with someone else. I'm not asking for a running partner, he said. He seemed to look for the word. I'm here. I'm across the hall. That's all I know how to offer right now, without making it into something that scares both of us. She almost laughed. Not a performance, a real one, small and quiet, at the accuracy of that. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The kettle was long since cold. The coffee was gone. The hallway outside was quiet. The new strip of weather stripping sealed properly against the door, the light above it steady and clear. She reached for the notebook. She opened it to the March list. She picked up the pen. She crossed off porch light. She crossed off door draft seal. She crossed off the step. She'd crossed off the tap weeks ago. She looked at what remained. The March budget line items. Gerald Park's folder. Lily's permission slip. The oil change the Civic needed in April. She looked at the list for a moment. Then she did something she almost never did. She turned to the back pages of the notebook, the ones that were blank, that she'd kept blank for the overflow of problems she couldn't solve yet. And she wrote one thing, not a problem, not a number, not a deadline. She wrote, "Ask for help when you need it." Then she closed the notebook. Damien was watching her. He'd seen her write something, not what. He didn't ask. Lily gets back at 7:30, she said. Sophie's back at 8. He stood, took his mug to the sink, rinsed it without being asked. She noticed that. He noticed her noticing. You don't have to. I know, he said. He took his toolbox. He went to the door. Emily, he said, with his hand on the frame. Yeah. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the door seal. He half smiled. The real version, the one that reached his eyes, the one she'd been cataloging without admitting it since approximately January. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. Yeah, she said. You will. He crossed the hall, his door closed. The strip of light appeared under it within a few minutes, steady and familiar, the way it always was. She sat at the table in her kitchen with the closed notebook and the 2 rinsed mugs drying in the rack, and the feeling of someone who has just allowed something to happen that they've been preventing for a long time. Not with relief, not with fear, but with the careful, tentative awareness of a person who has opened a window after a very long winter and is waiting to see what kind of air comes through. It was cold still in the evenings. March in Chicago always was. But something in the apartment felt slightly warmer. The thing about opening a window after a long winter is that you can't always control what comes through it. The week after the kitchen table conversation, Emily went back to her regular schedule. Diner, Gerald Park, Lily, notebook, repeat. And she told herself that nothing had fundamentally changed. The arrangement with Damien was still the arrangement. He was still across the hall. She was still across the hall. The girls still had their weekend corridor society. The coffee was still occasionally too much for one person. None of the facts had rearranged themselves. What had rearranged itself was something internal, and she was handling it the way she handled most internal things, by not looking directly at it, the way you don't look directly at the sun, working around it instead, catching it in the peripheral vision of her days while she kept her eyes on the practical things in front of her. It didn't entirely work, but it worked enough to get her through the week. Damien, for his part, seemed to be operating on the same principle. He was present in the ways he'd been present. The hallway, the mailboxes, the easy exchanges about the girls. But he didn't press on the kitchen table conversation, didn't reference it, didn't try to move them somewhere new before she was ready. She was aware of this, and aware that she was aware of it, and she found the whole thing both easier and more complicated than anything she'd bargained for. April arrived. The air started making gestures toward warmth without committing. The ice was gone, the streets were wet and gray, and occasionally honest about spring, and Emily started leaving her coat unzipped on the walk from the bus stop, which was as close to optimism as Chicago March-April transition allowed. Lily was thriving. That was the word Emily used in her own head when she let herself look at it directly. Thriving. The school had settled. Mara was her best friend now, a fact communicated through the quantity of mentions per dinner conversation. The art program on Saturdays had become the fixed pole around which Lily organized her week, and she'd come home 3 weeks ago with a painting she'd done in class. Abstract, heavy on blue and gold, structurally ambitious for a 7-year-old, that Emily had framed with a $10 frame from the craft store and hung on the kitchen wall. She looked at it every morning. It did something to her every single time. Damien noticed it during his second visit to the apartment. She'd invited him in for coffee again. That had become a thing now. Sunday evenings sometimes, if the girls were settled and neither of them was swamped. And he'd looked at the painting for a long moment and said, "Lily did this? Last month, in class. She has an eye," he said. He meant it. You could tell when Damien meant something because he didn't say things for the sake of saying them. He'd gone quiet after that, still looking at the painting, and then said, "Sophie spent 6 months telling everyone her favorite color was gray, and I didn't know whether to encourage artistic independence or call someone." Emily had laughed at that, a real one. "What happened?" she asked. "She met Lily," he said, and apparently switched to yellow. The thing that cracked them open happened on a Thursday night in mid-April, and it didn't happen the way she would have expected because there was no single dramatic moment. It was more like a seam that had been weakening for months, finally giving way under the weight of a perfectly ordinary evening. She'd come home from Gerald Park's late, close to 10:30, because Gerald had been unusually chatty that evening, going through old photographs he'd found in the back of a filing cabinet while they reconciled the February-March accounts. And she'd stayed longer than she should have because he was 70 years old, and the photographs were of his wife who'd died 2 years ago, and she didn't have the heart to cut it short. She'd taken the bus home feeling the kind of tiredness that wasn't just physical, the kind that lived below the surface, in the part of you that carries more than can be put on any list. The 4th-floor hallway was quiet. Lily was with Priya. The light above Emily's door was on. It was always on now, a fact she had simply incorporated into the landscape of her life without examining it too closely. Damien's light was on under his door. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of his keyboard, the specific rhythm of someone writing something, not a phone call, not a meeting, just working. She stood outside her door with her keys in her hand. She didn't knock. She went inside. She paid Priya, saw Lily settled, and then made tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked at Gerald Park's folder and the notebook and the painting on the wall and felt, in the specific way that comes over a person who is very tired and has been strong for a very long time, the weight of all of it sitting on her chest. It wasn't a crisis. She was clear on that. The bills were paid. The car was running. Lily was healthy and sleeping safely down the hall. Nothing was on fire. It was just that Gerald had been looking at those photographs of his wife, and she'd thought, watching him, about what it meant to have a person. A real one. The kind that stayed when the photographs were old and the filing cabinet was dusty, and the Thursday evenings ran long. The kind you didn't have to explain yourself to from scratch every time. The kind that knew the notebook existed and what it meant and didn't make it into a problem to be solved. She put her tea down. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the line she'd written in the back pages. Ask for help when you need it. And she thought about the fact that this wasn't about the tap or the step or any piece of physical infrastructure. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She texted him. Are you still up? 3 seconds. Yeah. Everything okay? She looked at her tea. She looked at the painting. Can you come over for a few minutes? A pause. Longer than the first one. Give me 2. He knocked in 90 seconds, which meant he'd been already near the door, and she let him in and he came in and looked at her face and didn't say anything immediately, which was the right call. Sit down, she said. He sat. She sat across from him. The tea was between them. Gerald showed me pictures of his wife tonight, she said. They were married 31 years. He mentioned her once, Damien said, at the mailboxes. He said he still buys 2 of everything at the grocery store by accident. She looked at him. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, he said. It really is. She put her hands around the mug. It had cooled, but she held it anyway. This isn't me falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I know. I just got home and I felt... She stopped. She tried to find the word that was actually true. Lonely, she said. I felt lonely, and I noticed it, which I don't usually do because usually I'm too busy to notice it. He was quiet. He was looking at her with an expression she'd catalogued but never quite named. Attentive but not pitying, concerned but not projecting, there without requiring anything back from her. I've been lonely for a long time, she said. I built a whole system around not admitting it, because admitting it felt like a weakness I couldn't afford. She looked at the table. And then I moved in across from you and you were there, all the time, quietly, not making it into anything I had to manage. She looked up. And I don't know what to do with that. He held her gaze. You don't have to do anything with it. Damien, I mean it. You don't owe me a response or a decision or a whatever you think I'm expecting. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. I'm going to tell you something and you can take it or leave it, and either way, I'm still across the hall tomorrow. She waited. I've been looking for reasons to see you, he said, since the day you moved in. The kitchen was very quiet. When you moved those boxes by yourself, he said, 3 trips, no elevator, and you had the lamp with the bent neck. I watched from my doorway and I thought, who is this person, and why does she look like she's been carrying things alone her entire life? He said it without drama, just how it was. And then I met you properly and I thought, I need to not do anything stupid here because this woman will close the door so fast I won't even see it happen. You were right, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. I know I was right. He almost smiled. So I just stayed. Did what I could from the hallway. Fixed the things I could reach. He looked at his hands. Not to make you need me. I want to be very clear about that. I never wanted you to need me. You don't need anyone. You've proved that 6 different ways. He looked up. I just wanted to be somewhere near you. That's the whole of it. She sat with that. She sat with it for long enough that most people would have filled the silence with something. He didn't. He just waited. With the patience she'd come to understand was not passivity. It was the deliberate, chosen stillness of a man who had learned the hard way that pushing didn't work and had decided that waiting was the braver option. I have a lot of damage, she said finally. I know. Not the useful kind. The kind that makes you suspicious of people who are nice to you. The kind that's always looking for the moment when the favor comes due. I know, he said again. I've watched you looking for it with me. And I'm still here. She looked at him across the table, at the man who had shown up at her door at 3 a.m. because the ceiling was leaking, and at 10 at night when she knocked for Tylenol, and every ordinary moment in between, without once making it something she had to pay for. I'm scared, she said. She'd never said that out loud to another adult in longer than she could remember. Not of you specifically, just of, I built this very particular life, and it works, and it's mine, and I can predict it, and you're not predictable. No, he said. I'm probably not. That's not comforting. No, he agreed. It's not. He leaned back. I could lie to you, tell you I'm steady and reliable and this is all very safe, but you'd know it was a performance and you'd never trust me after. She laughed, small and surprised and real. Yeah, I would. So I'll tell you the truth instead. He held her gaze. I work too much. I'm not always emotionally available even when I want to be. I forget things that aren't on a calendar. I made my marriage fail in ways that weren't entirely Claire's fault, and I know that, and I'm still figuring out what it means. He paused. But I am here. Whatever I am, I'm actually here. And I don't think I'm going to stop being here because I've tried. He said it with a flatness that was almost funny. I spent January trying to give you space and just ended up knowing when the stairwell light was out because I knew you'd be taking the stairs at 11:40. She stared at him. That's either romantic or unsettling. Somewhere in the middle, he said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen held them both. Every favor I've ever accepted in my life has come with a cost, she said. The money helped when Lily was a baby. Strings. The cosign for my first lease. Strings. My mother's support when Marcus left. Not strings exactly, but a weight. The kind that makes you feel like you owe your suffering to someone else. She looked at her hands. You've been fixing things in my apartment for 4 months, and you have never once made me feel like I was in debt to you. You're not in debt to me. I know. She looked at him. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That you're the first person in a long time that I know that about. She paused. I don't trust easily. I've told you why, but I trust that you're not keeping score. She took a breath. I wanted you to know that I see it. What you've been doing, not just the repairs. All of it. He was very still. Okay, he said. I'm not ready for... She stopped. I don't know exactly what I'm ready for. I've been managing alone for so long that I'm not even sure what the alternative looks like in practice. What would help? He asked. She blinked. What? What would help you feel less like it's a risk? I'm not asking you to take anything on faith. I'm asking what would make it feel like less of a jump. She hadn't expected that question. She sat with it for a moment. Nothing dramatic, she said finally. No gestures. I don't trust gestures. I trust... She thought about what she actually trusted. I trust the Tuesday evenings when you're on a call and Sophie's doing homework, and I can hear both of you through the wall, and it sounds like a household that functions. She paused. I trust the fact that you remembered Lily's knee 3 weeks later. I trust the note you left about the coffee. She looked at him. I trust small things. I don't trust big things. He nodded slowly. I can work with small things. I know you can, she said. That's been evident. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Just the particular quality of air when two people have been honest with each other and are sitting in the aftermath of it, not uncomfortable but not entirely comfortable either, calibrating. There's something else, she said. He waited. Sophie, she said, and Lily. She held his gaze. If this, whatever this is, if it goes badly, those two are close. I won't do something that hurts them. Neither will I, he said, without hesitation. I mean it. I know you do. He leaned forward again. Sophie has exactly 2 people she talks about constantly. One of them is a girl named Gemma from kindergarten who moved to Portland in October. The other is Lily. He paused. I thought about this before the door seal. I thought about it before the tap. I'm not doing anything without thinking about Sophie first. Emily looked at him. Good, she said. Yeah, he said. Good. A pause that was less uncomfortable than the last one. You should go to bed, she said. Not dismissive, just real. It's almost midnight. Yeah. He stood. He picked up his mug and washed it at the sink, the same way he had the first time, without being asked. She watched him do this and felt the same thing she'd felt before, the specific noticing of a small, unremarkable act, and what it meant that it had become something she relied on without realizing. He set the mug in the rack. Emily? He said, turning around. Yeah. He held her gaze for a moment. He seemed to be deciding whether to say something and then deciding to say it. "For the record," he said, "I'm not keeping score. I never was. But if I were—" He stopped, reconsidered. "You're the strongest person I know, and I don't mean that the way people mean it when they're trying to make someone feel better about a hard life." He said it the way he said most things, directly, without decoration. "I mean it the way I mean anything I've thought about carefully and decided is actually true." She looked at him. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Go to bed," she said. Soft this time. He almost smiled. "Night, Emily." "Good night." He crossed the hall. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment after she heard his door close. She went to the notebook. She turned to the back pages where she'd written "Ask for help when you need it." Under it, she wrote one more thing. She didn't think about it first. She just wrote it, "Let someone stay." Then she closed the notebook. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the buildings settle around her. The radiator, the distant traffic, the faint sound of a city that never fully slept. And for the first time in longer than she could put a date to, the weight on her chest felt manageable. Not gone, not fixed, just carried differently. The following weeks moved at the pace of something that was real rather than planned, which meant they moved unevenly, with texture, not in a straight line. There was a Sunday in late April when she and Damien and both girls ended up at the same table for dinner. Not orchestrated, just the natural conclusion of an afternoon where Sophie had been at 4B since 2 and nobody had eaten, and it was getting dark. Emily made pasta, the one she made well. Simple, a bit of garlic and olive oil, and whatever vegetables were in the crisper, the kind of meal that didn't require anything fancy to work. Damien sat at her kitchen table with his elbows on the surface and talked to Lily about her art program while Emily cooked. And Lily, who was not usually forthcoming with strangers or near strangers, talked back with the focused engagement of a child who had decided this person was safe to talk to. It should have been strange. 4 people in a small kitchen, the steam from the pasta, the lamp with the bent neck casting its usual slightly left-of-center light over the table. It wasn't strange. That was the part she kept returning to. Sophie helped set the table. She'd appointed herself responsible for this with the authority of someone given a diplomatic portfolio. And Lily produced the salt and pepper without being asked, because that was Lily's contribution to meals at home, always had been. And Damien refilled water glasses without asking whose was empty. Nobody tripped over it. Nobody performed anything. "This is good," Sophie said about the pasta, with the blunt sincerity of a 6-year-old who doesn't compliment food she doesn't mean it about. "Thank you," Emily said. "My daddy makes good grilled cheese," Sophie said, establishing the record. "So I've heard," Emily said, with a glance at Lily that Lily pretended not to see. After dinner, the girls migrated to Lily's room with the unanimous decision of people who have other business to attend to, and Emily and Damien sat at the cleared table with the leftover pasta between them and a comfortable silence that she was aware she hadn't had with another adult in years. "Can I ask about the notebook?" he said. She looked at him. "What about it?" "You write in it every day, multiple times. It's how I manage things." "I know, I mean—" He looked at the table. "When did you start?" She thought about it. Lily was about 4 months old. Marcus had been gone about a month and the numbers weren't adding up, and I couldn't keep them all in my head anymore. She paused. "I bought it at a dollar store. I thought it would be temporary." 3 years, he said. 6, she said. Lily's 7. I started about 3 years before I left Marcus. He looked at her. "Before?" "Things started going wrong before he left," she said. "I just didn't see it. I was busy keeping everything organized." She paused. "The notebook became the one thing I could trust. Numbers don't change what they are between the time you write them down and the time you read them back. People do." He nodded slowly. "And now?" She looked at the notebook on the counter. "Now it's still how I manage things. It's still, I need it. I'm not going to stop needing it." She paused. "But I think the way I use it might be changing a little." "How?" She thought about the entries in the back pages, the 2 lines she'd written alone at midnight, not a budget item, not a repair note, just something true. I used to put everything in it, she said. Every problem, every plan, every variable I needed to control. She looked at him. I think I'm starting to understand that some things don't go in the notebook. He held her gaze. What kind of things? The kind you can't control, she said, and maybe shouldn't try to. He was quiet for a moment. That's significant, he said. Don't make it into a thing. I'm not making it into a thing. I'm just saying. I know you're just saying. She looked at her hands on the table. It's significant to me, too. That's why I said it. He reached across the table, not to take her hand. He stopped short of that, his hand just near hers on the table's surface, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it without being required to respond. It was a question without words. She didn't move her hand away. They sat like that for a moment, not touching, not touching, in the specific suspended state of two cautious people who have decided to stop moving backward without yet knowing how to move forward. And the apartment was quiet around them, and the lamp cast its slightly left-of-center light. And somewhere down the hall, Lily and Sophie were conducting their private world with the assurance of children who do not worry about the same things their parents do. May arrived, and the city remembered it was supposed to be capable of warmth. The lake smell came back in the mornings, the particular sharp, fresh smell of Chicago spring that was nothing like anywhere else, and that Emily, who had grown up 200 miles south, had come to love in the specific way you love a thing that surprised you. She started leaving her window open at night. Small thing. Damien noticed. He mentioned it once, passing in the hall, that he could hear the city better now, something in the building acoustics. She said the same. They stood in the hallway for a moment longer than the sentence required, which was its own kind of comment on where they were. She told Lily on a Wednesday evening in early May that she and Damien were friends. She started with friends because it was the truest word she had, and because Lily was 7 and the conversation didn't need to be complicated. Lily looked at her for a moment with the serious face she'd inherited. He likes you, she said. Sophie told me. Emily went very still. What exactly did Sophie say? That her dad talks about you sometimes when she's supposed to be asleep. Lily picked up her fork. She wasn't fully asleep. Emily looked at her pasta. What does he say? Lily shrugged with the exquisite casualness of a child in possession of valuable information. Just your name, and stuff about the building. She paused. And that you're smart. Emily did not know what to do with her face, so she took a drink of water. Is he your boyfriend? Lily asked, with the practical directness of a 7-year-old who has decided the social niceties are wasting time. No, Emily said. Is he going to be? Lily, I'm just asking. I know you're just asking. Emily looked at her daughter. The 7-year-old who made lists like her mother and had her mother's serious eyes and had been carrying the particular shape of their small family with her since before she was old enough to know what shape it was. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Lily considered this. She seemed to find it acceptable. Sophie wants us to be sisters, she said, returning to her pasta. Emily looked at her. You can't just... That's not how that works. I know, she knows. She just wants to. Lily ate a bite. I told her we're basically already friends that live near each other, which is almost the same. Emily looked at her daughter. That was very wise, she said. I know, Lily said simply. I get it from you. Emily did the thing she almost never did in front of Lily. She let her eyes go wet, just briefly, just for a second, before she blinked it back and picked up her fork and said, Eat your vegetables, with the authority of a woman in full control of herself. She was not in full control of herself, but she was getting better at acknowledging that. It was a Saturday evening in the middle of May when it became real in a way that no longer required footnotes or qualifications. The girls had been asleep for an hour. Sophie had stayed over for the first time, the two of them in Lily's room, an arrangement that had required a sleeping bag and a negotiation about the nightlight setting and then no further assistance. Emily and Damien had ordered Thai food. She'd let him pay, which was its own small revolution in the internal governance of Emily Parker. And they were on the couch, the takeout containers between them on the coffee table, the window open to the May night air. They'd been talking about something unremarkable. Gerald Park's plans to retire, what that meant for Emily's Thursday arrangement. And then they hadn't been talking, just sitting in the particular comfortable silence of people who have stopped needing to fill the space. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him along her left side. She was aware of this. She'd been aware of it for about 20 minutes. "I've been thinking," she said. "Yeah?" "About what you said. That you've been trying to give me space and ended up knowing the stairwell schedule anyway." He looked at her. That confession was meant to be charming, not alarming. "It was both," she said. "That's the problem with you." She turned slightly so she was looking at him properly. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone with an agenda, or someone who got bored when I didn't make it easy." She paused. "Most people don't stay when things are complicated." "I have a 6-year-old and a company," he said. "Complicated is my default." "That's not what I mean." "I know." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" She stopped. She thought about the notebook, about the 2 entries in the back pages, about the words someone he'd said in the hallway in February and how she'd lain awake thinking about it, about Gerald Park and his photographs in 31 years, about Lily's face across the dinner table, about the way the apartment felt different now than it had in October, not because anything structural had changed, but because something about the weight of it had shifted. She looked at Damien Sterling on her second-hand couch in her small kitchen-adjacent living room with the takeout containers between them and the city coming in through the window and his reading glasses on top of his head because he'd never taken them off from whatever he'd been looking at before she invited him over. And she thought about how entirely unromantic and entirely real this was. "I'm done running the other direction," she said. He was quiet. "That's all," she said. "I'm not making any promises about how fast or what it looks like. I'm just telling you I'm done pointing myself away from it." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He reached over and moved the takeout containers to the table. He leaned back on the couch. She leaned back next to him. Their shoulders were touching. Neither of them moved away. The window let in the city, the distant sound of traffic, someone's music 2 blocks over, the particular ambient hum of a place that was always, under everything, alive. The lamp with the bent neck did its slightly off-angle thing. The notebook was on the counter, closed. She was not reaching for it. She turned her head slightly and looked at the side of his face. The jaw she'd cataloged since October, the dark hair that still needed a cut, the lines beside his eye that came from everything he'd carried and hadn't managed to put down yet. He was looking at the middle distance, thinking something she wasn't privy to, which was fine. He was allowed. "Hey," she said. He turned to look at her. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a moment, at the realness of him, the imperfect and complicated and genuinely there-ness of him. And she felt the wall she'd maintained for 6 years do something she hadn't planned for. Not fall. She'd have noticed a fall. It just stopped holding quite so tight. And she found, sitting in that small gap between held and let go, that she could breathe slightly easier than she had in longer than she could account for. She didn't say any of this. She wasn't going to say any of this tonight, maybe not for a while. There were things you could only approach slowly, the way you approach something you're not sure will stay. Carefully, without sudden moves, one honest step at a time. But she was moving toward it. That was new. That was real. And somewhere down the hall, in a room with a borrowed sleeping bag and a compromised nightlight setting, 2 little girls slept in the uncomplicated certainty that the adults had things handled, which wasn't entirely true and never fully was, but was true enough. Tonight, that nobody had to carry it alone. The city breathed through the window. The lamp held its bent angle. The wall held its new, slightly less than solid shape. Emily Parker sat with her shoulder against Damien Sterling's and did not reach for the notebook. It was a small thing. It was the biggest thing she'd done in years. The summer came the way Chicago summers do. Suddenly, without apology, like someone had thrown open a door that had been stuck all year. The lake turned blue-green and the sidewalks steamed after afternoon rain, and the city seemed to exhale something it had been holding since November. Emily noticed it the morning she walked to the bus stop without her coat and felt the air on her arms and thought, without irony, that this was enough. This particular morning, the warmth and the smell of the lake 2 miles east and the sound of the city waking up around her. This was enough to be grateful for. She was not a person who used the word grateful easily. It had always seemed like a thing people said when they were trying to make peace with a situation that hadn't actually resolved. But this was different. This felt less like acceptance and more like arrival. The sense of having gotten somewhere after a long time in transit. She was still working the diner shifts. She was still doing Gerald Park's books on Thursdays. She was still making the lunch every morning with the post-it note inside. "You're doing great, kid." And still running the math in her head on the bus, and still writing things in the notebook. The notebook was still there. She didn't expect it to disappear. It was part of how she was built, and she'd made peace with that. What had changed was what she put in it. The back pages had grown. Not with problems. With other things. Lily's quote from school on a Tuesday that she hadn't wanted to lose. The name of the paint color Sophie had decided was her new favorite. Lily had correctly identified it as a shade of yellow. The address of a restaurant Damien had mentioned that she'd been meaning to look up. A note to herself in the margin, in handwriting that looked slightly different from her budget entries, like it had been written more slowly. "You don't have to earn your place here." She'd written that one on a Thursday night after Gerald Park had told her, packing up his ledger folder, that she was the best thing that had happened to his books in 30 years. She'd thanked him. She'd walked to the bus stop. She'd stood there in the early June evening and thought about what it meant to receive a compliment without immediately calculating what it cost. She was getting better at that. Slowly. Damien had not pushed for anything she hadn't offered first. That was still the operating principle between them, and she was still the one who set the pace, which was still slower than he would probably have moved if left to his own devices. She knew this. She wasn't naive about it. But he never made her feel the gap. He seemed to have genuinely decided that whatever she brought, when she brought it, was worth the wait. She didn't entirely understand this. She was trying to accept it without interrogating it to death. They had been something for 2 months by the time June arrived. She didn't have a clean word for it and had stopped trying to find one. He was in her apartment 3 or 4 evenings a week. She was in his on the others. The girls had blurred the domestic boundary between 4A and 4B so comprehensively that the concept of separate households had become largely administrative. Sophie's purple water bottle lived on Emily's second shelf. Lily's library books were regularly found in Damien's living room. Nobody thought this was strange anymore. It was possible nobody had thought it was strange for a while, and Emily was the last to notice. He had not said anything in June beyond what the moment required. He was good at reading what a moment required. She'd watched him do it with Sophie, the particular skill of knowing when to push and when to wait. And she understood now that it wasn't a technique he deployed strategically. It was just how he was built. He had learned, probably the hard way, that the things worth having came on their own schedule. She had not said anything either, not the full version of it. There were things in her chest that she was carrying around like objects she hadn't yet found the right shelf for, and she was aware of them and not ready to set them down. Until July. It was a Wednesday evening, the first week of July, and the building had a broken air conditioning unit in the shared stairwell that Frank the Super was allegedly addressing but had not yet addressed, which meant the 4th floor was the temperature of a considered decision about moving somewhere with better infrastructure. Emily had the windows open. Damien had the windows open. The sounds of both apartments mixed in the hallway with the lazy ease of things that had stopped maintaining careful separations. The girls were in Lily's room conducting some kind of creative project that involved paper, scissors, and a level of operational security that suggested they didn't want adult input. Every so often there was the sound of Sophie laughing at something, a particular high, bright sound that Emily had come to love without deciding to. She and Damien were in her kitchen. She was making iced tea because the heat made coffee feel like a bad decision. And he'd mentioned in passing that he hadn't had good iced tea since visiting his grandmother in Georgia when he was 12, which was such a specific and human detail that she'd gone to the store that morning and bought the loose-leaf kind, not the packets. He was sitting at the kitchen table watching her make it. The whole process, the steeping, the cooling, the exact amount of sugar she added, which was less than most people used, with the expression of a man who was not in a hurry to be anywhere else. "You went to the store," he said. "I was already going," she said, "for iced tea supplies specifically." She didn't answer. He didn't push it. She brought both glasses to the table and sat down, and they drank the iced tea, and it was genuinely quite good, and he said so without making a performance of it. "I want to tell you something," she said. He set his glass down. He gave her his full attention the way he did. Not tense, not bracing, just open. "When I moved in here," she said, "I had a specific plan. I was going to get through the year, pay down the debt from the last place, get Lily settled in school, build the buffer fund back up to 3 months. Then I was going to start looking at whether I could qualify for a small business loan and take Gerald Park's bookkeeping into something bigger." She paused. "That was the whole plan. That was the entire horizon." "Okay," he said. "I didn't have room in the plan for anything I couldn't control." She looked at the glass in her hands. "I had decided, basically, that personal things were a variable I couldn't afford, that they cost more than they returned, that the math never worked out." He was quiet. "I was wrong about the math," she said. He looked at her across the table. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, because she thought he'd been patient enough that he no longer expected to be surprised by her, but something more careful than that. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, like relief. "How wrong?" he asked, quietly. "Pretty significantly wrong," she said. She looked at him. I keep trying to find the right way to say this that doesn't sound like either a greeting card or a deposition, and I haven't found it, so I'm just going to say it the way it actually is." "Please," he said. "I love you," she said. "I don't know exactly when that happened, and I can't tell you what column of the notebook it belongs to. It's just true. And I'm telling you because I'm done filing things I can't put down." The kitchen was very quiet. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not gently, not with any performance of gentleness, just took it, solid and certain, the way you take hold of something you've been careful about dropping for a long time. "Emily," he said, "you don't have to—" "I love you," he said. "I've been in love with you since approximately the night I brought you the Tylenol and you told me exactly the fever temperature and made it clear you didn't need any further input." He said it with the flat directness she'd fallen in love with, which was its own irony. "I just wasn't going to say it before you were ready to hear it." She looked at him. She looked at his hand around hers. "That was December," she said. "December," he confirmed. She let out a breath. "That's a long time to wait." "You're worth waiting for," he said, simply, without drama. "I knew that from the lamp with the bent neck." She laughed. It came out slightly unsteady, which she allowed because the kitchen was just the two of them and she didn't have to perform steadiness here anymore. "I have a lot of things I'm still working on," she said. "I want to be honest about that. The not asking for help, the keeping score automatically even when I'm trying not to, the notebook." She paused. "The notebook is not going away." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "I have things I'm working on too. The working too much, the going internal when things are hard instead of saying them out loud. The fact that I still forget to buy milk approximately 60% of the time." He paused. "These are real problems." "The milk one is a real problem," she agreed. "I know, Sophie has mentioned it." She smiled. He smiled back. Not the half version, not the almost. The full one, the one she'd been cataloging since January and could now look at directly. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. The summer opened up after that, and what it opened into was not a perfect thing, but a real one, which was better. It was the Saturday mornings when she started letting him make the coffee. He made it stronger than she would have, which she'd complained about twice before deciding she actually liked it that way and would not be admitting this. It was the Tuesday evenings when Sophie did homework at Emily's kitchen table because Damien had a call and Sophie worked better with other people around, a fact she had announced without embarrassment that Emily found charming. It was the Sunday breakfast that had expanded from Emily's protected ritual into something larger and louder, pancakes on a griddle, Lily and Sophie with flour on their hands because they had opinions about participation, Damien at the stove doing something with eggs that he was very serious about, and that Emily had learned was a legitimate skill. It was imperfect in all the ways real things are. Damien's work would take him out of reach sometimes. A 3-day stretch in August when he was in New York for meetings, and the hallway felt quieter than she'd expected, and she'd realized with the mild alarm of someone who preferred not to need things that she'd gotten used to him being there. She'd told him this when he got back, standing in the hallway while Sophie and Lily greeted each other like soldiers returning from distant campaigns. "Good," he'd said. "I was worried you hadn't noticed I was gone." "I always notice," she said. "I've been noticing you since October." "I know," he said. "I know you have." There were harder patches, too, because there always are. A week in mid-August, when a deal Damien had been working for 3 months fell through, and he came home with the specific flatness of a person who has absorbed a professional loss and hasn't processed it yet, and he was quiet in a way that pulled inward, and she recognized it because she'd made the same move herself approximately 100 times. She knocked on his door that night with a container of leftovers and said, "Eat something," and sat with him at his kitchen table while he talked through it, not fixing it, not offering solutions, just being present in the way he'd been present with her through 7 months of her own complications. He'd looked at her at some point in the middle of it and said, "I'm not very good at this." And she'd said, "I know, neither am I. We're figuring it out." And that was the truth of it, and it was enough. The miscommunications happened too because they were two adults who had both spent years managing everything alone and had different instincts about how to share space. She caught herself twice in August defaulting to the old pattern, absorbing a problem silently, routing around it rather than saying it out loud. And both times he noticed and waited and eventually said carefully, "You've gone quiet on something." Both times she'd had to breathe through the reflex to say "I'm fine" before telling him the actual thing. It didn't get easier the way she'd hoped. It got possible, which was different, and which she was beginning to understand was what progress actually looked like. The notebook changed slowly, not structurally. She still tracked the bills, the deadlines, the car schedule. The March plan format was still there, and the April plan after it, and so on. But the back pages had filled with things that were not problems. A list of restaurants they'd been to, rated by whose food the girls had liked best. A fragment of something Lily had said one morning at breakfast that was so unexpectedly funny that Emily had written it down immediately because she didn't want to forget it. Damien's coffee brand because she'd eventually given up and bought it herself. And in the margin of the August page, in the same slow handwriting she'd been using for the things she wanted to keep, "This is what a life looks like when you let it be one." Gerald Park retired in September. He told her on the second Thursday of the month, sitting across from his green ledger for the last time, that he was selling the dry cleaning operation to a young couple from the neighborhood who had their own accountant and wouldn't be needing a Thursday bookkeeper. He said it with the practical simplicity of a man who had arranged his affairs carefully. He also handed her an envelope. She looked at the envelope. "Gerald, severance," he said. "Don't argue. I know what the word means." "We never discussed 30 years I did my own books, and they were a mess," he said. 2 years with you and the inspector didn't find a single error. That's worth something." He folded his hands. "Buy your daughter something nice." She opened the envelope. It was $800 in a cashier's check. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about pride. She thought about what pride had cost her, added up over the years. The times she'd refused help that would have made things easier. The times she'd rerouted around a problem rather than accepting an offered hand. The times she'd stood on principle in a situation that had no principle to stand on, just her own stubborn refusal to be in anyone's debt. She thought about the line in the notebook, "Ask for help when you need it." She thought about the one after it, "Let someone stay." She looked at Gerald Park, 70 years old, white-haired, wearing the same cardigan he'd worn every single Thursday for 2 years, sitting in his shop for the last time with his photographs in a box beside the register. "Thank you," she said, without qualification, without calculating what she owed him in return. He nodded. "You're a good person," he said. "Try to remember that." She went home. She told Damien about the check that evening, standing in his kitchen while he made dinner. He listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then he said, "What are you going to do with it?" "Part of it goes to the buffer fund," she said. "That's automatic." "And the rest?" She looked at him. "Lily's been talking about a telescope." He raised an eyebrow. "A telescope." "She read something at school about the James Webb images. She wants to look at space." Emily paused. I kept telling her we'd see. Buy her the telescope, he said. Not as advice, as the obvious conclusion. It's not in the budget. Emily. He looked at her. Buy the kid the telescope. She looked at him for a moment. Yeah, she said. Okay. She bought the telescope the following Saturday. It was a mid-range beginner's model, better than the cheapest, not anywhere near the expensive end, and she set it up in the living room with Lily that afternoon, both of them reading the instruction manual with the focused teamwork of two people who took instruction manuals seriously. Damien and Sophie came over that evening. They moved the telescope to the window and took turns looking, first at the moon, which was close enough to full that the craters were visible, and then at whatever else they could find. Sophie asked if they could see aliens. Lily told her aliens hadn't been confirmed yet, but the universe was very large and statistically interesting. Sophie accepted this. They stood at the window in the fading September, light, two adults and two children passing a telescope between them, looking at the same sky from a window on the fourth floor of a building on Clover Street. And Emily thought about how different this was from what she'd planned when she moved in a year ago. She'd planned for survival. She'd planned for endurance. She'd planned to get through the year and build the buffer and start the next phase, and keep the forward motion going by herself with her notebook, and her lists, and her discipline. She hadn't planned for this. She was finding, increasingly, that the things she hadn't planned for were the ones that mattered most. October came. 1 year from the day she'd moved in. She noticed the date because she was someone who noticed dates, and she sat with it on the morning of the 1st, the same Tuesday kind of afternoon light, the same building, the same hallway, the same stairs she'd carried 2 duffel bags, and a box of Lily's books, and a lamp with a bent neck up alone. Refusing the elevator because the elevator meant waiting, and waiting meant someone might offer to help. She thought about that woman. She thought about how much she'd known and how much she hadn't. She thought about what it had taken, not from him, not from any external force, but from herself, to get from the woman in October of last year to the woman sitting in this kitchen with the iced tea in the cabinet and the telescope in the corner and the notebook on the counter and the coffee that was stronger than she would have made it. The honest accounting of it was not a fairy tale. She had not been rescued. She had not been fixed. The bills were still real. The diner was still 6 days a week. The car still required attention. Gerald Park was retired, and she was building something new. She'd picked up 2 bookkeeping clients in September through a neighborhood small business network, nothing huge, but a beginning. And the beginning was hers in the way all her beginnings had been hers, built from scratch with the tools she had. The difference was that she was building it in a life that had more in it, more people, more noise in the hallway, more grilled cheese that wasn't hers, more Sunday mornings that were too full and slightly too loud and not what she'd protected and entirely what she'd needed. Damien knocked on her door at 8 that morning. She was still in her robe, which she registered a year ago would have required a composed response and now required nothing. And he was holding 2 coffees from the cart on the corner, not the cafe, because he was still that person and probably always would be, and he said, 1 year. 1 year, she said, taking the coffee. How are you doing with it? She thought about the question. She thought about the answer she would have given a year ago. Fine, I'm handling it. And she thought about the answer she had now. Better than I expected, she said. Worse than I planned. He looked at her. Is that good or bad? Both. She held the coffee. The plan was too small. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She looked at him. I had a plan that was exactly the size of what I could guarantee, and everything outside the plan felt like a risk I couldn't afford. She paused. And then you moved things around in my hallway without asking, and I moved things in your hallway? Metaphorically, she said. Stop being literal. He smiled. She felt it the same way she'd felt it the first time. In the chest, in the specific place that she'd spent a year pretending was not a relevant data point. You moved things, she said. You made room for yourself in the perimeter of my life, and I couldn't get you out, and eventually I stopped trying. Romantic, he said. I'm a practical person. I know. He leaned against her doorframe, the doorframe with the properly sealed weather stripping, the one he'd pressed flat on a Saturday afternoon while she came home from the diner and found him there and finally stopped running the other direction. "I have something I want to ask you." "Okay." He held her gaze. He was not nervous. She would have been able to tell if he was nervous. She knew every register of him by now. But he was serious in a way that was slightly different from his regular serious. "Sophie has been asking me for 6 months," he said, "whether we could all live together." Emily went still. "She hasn't asked you?" "She asked Lily," Emily said. "Lily told me. I didn't—" She stopped. "I didn't know what to do with it." "Neither did I," he said. "I told her it was a complicated question for adults. She told me that complicated questions for adults are usually just questions that adults are scared of." He paused. "She's 7. 6. She turned 7 in August." Emily looked at him. "She's 7 and she's right." "She is," he said. "She usually is. It's extremely annoying." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to make a decision this morning. I'm not asking you to make a decision this month. I'm just telling you that it's a question I have, and Sophie has, and I think Lily has, and I wanted to stop pretending it wasn't there." "You're good at that," she said, saying the thing instead of pretending it isn't there. "I learned from someone," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the question, the practical version, what it meant logistically, financially, in terms of the girls and the school and the building and the space and all the variables she could account for. And then she did something she'd been practicing for a year. She let the practical version go, just for a moment. She thought about the other version, about what it would mean to wake up and not have to listen through the wall, about Lily and Sophie in the same house in the sustained daily way rather than the hallway corridor society way, about a kitchen where the coffee was already made because someone else had gotten up first, about a life where the notebook stayed on her side of things and the decisions lived somewhere shared. She thought about the word together, the full weight of it. "Ask me again in a few months," she said. He nodded. "Not because the answer is no," she said, "because the answer is real, and I want to give it to you when I'm sure." "That's fair," he said. "You're going to have to wait again," she said. "You're worth waiting for," he said. Same words as July, still true. She rolled her eyes, which was new. She'd been allowing herself small acts of unguarded affection, and the eye roll was a recent addition, the kind of thing you do with someone you've stopped performing for. He laughed. She loved that sound. She'd loved it since January, and she was done pretending otherwise. The answer came 6 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in November, which was almost exactly 13 months from the day Emily had carried 2 duffel bags and a lamp with a bent neck up 4 flights of stairs by herself. She'd made the pancakes, the full version, with the batter from scratch, not the mix. Lily and Sophie had found their way to the kitchen by some internal children's alarm system and were sitting at the table with the expectant patience of small people who understand that pancakes require waiting. Damien had made the coffee. The window was closed against the November air, but the light was good. The kind of pale morning light that does something decent to a kitchen. Emily stood at the stove with the batter and the pan and the particular smell of a Sunday that had, over the course of a year, become one of the things she protected most. She'd been thinking for 6 weeks. She'd been putting things in the notebook, not a budget, not a plan, but something closer to an accounting of what was true, what she needed, what Lily needed, what she was afraid of and why, and whether the why was sound or whether it was just the old reflex reaching for its old justifications. She'd concluded that the fear was real. She'd also concluded that the fear was not the most important thing in the room. She turned from the stove. Damien was at the counter reading something on his phone, the way he did on Sunday mornings before the day got going. Sophie was explaining to Lily, with great authority, why elephants were superior to all other animals. Lily was disagreeing on the grounds of velocity, which was a good argument. "Damien," she said. He looked up. She held his gaze across the kitchen. Her kitchen, small and imperfect, with the ceiling that had been patched and the radiator that had opinions, and the lamp with the bent neck and the painting Lily had made on the wall, and the telescope in the corner and the notebook on the counter with its full back pages and its front pages that no longer carried the weight of an entire world. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. He understood the question she was answering. She could see that he understood it. "Yeah?" he said. Yes, she said again, clear, unambiguous. Hers. He set his phone down. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he stopped in front of her, and she looked up at him, and he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 13 months, like she was something he hadn't planned for and wasn't going to let go of. He put his hand against her face, just briefly, just for a moment. She leaned into it slightly, which was not something she would have done 13 months ago, and which she did now without thinking. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Behind them, Sophie said very clearly, "Are they done?" Lily said, "Almost, I think." "Should we be quiet?" Lily considered this. Probably for a minute. Sophie fell briefly silent, which was its own kind of miracle. Emily turned back to the stove before the pancakes burned. Damien stood next to her at the counter. Not in the way, just there, present. The way he'd always been, since the beginning, in the specific and unremarkable and necessary way. She made the pancakes. He poured the coffee. The girls resumed the elephant versus horse debate with renewed energy. The November light held the kitchen in its pale, honest way. This was not a perfect life. She wanted to be clear about that, to herself, the only person whose clarity on the matter ultimately counted. The bills would continue to be real. The work would continue to be hard. The old reflexes, the reaching for the notebook, the instinct to close the door, would come back sometimes, because they were part of how she was built, and you don't disassemble that in a year. She would still have mornings where the weight felt like too much. He would still have weeks when work pulled him inward, and she'd have to be the one to wait. The girls would fight eventually, because children who love each other do. There would be logistics and complications, and moments where the whole thing felt fragile in a way that required tending. But she'd learned something in 13 months that she hadn't known when she carried those bags up the stairs alone. She'd learned that fragile and worth it were not opposites, that the things requiring tending were not liabilities, that the notebook could hold the budget and the back pages could hold the rest, and neither one was more important than the other. That ask for help when you need it was not a weakness but a form of trust, and that trust, extended carefully and slowly, and with full knowledge of the risk, was the only way anything real ever got built. She'd learned that the strongest thing she'd done, stronger than every double shift, stronger than every late-night number session, stronger than every problem she'd solved alone, was letting someone stay. She put the first pancake on the plate. Sophie said finally, with the unashamed relief of someone who had been patient for a very long time. Lily said Sophie in the tone of someone managing public relations. Damien put a mug of coffee at Emily's elbow without asking. She picked it up. She drank it. It was stronger than she would have made it. She was done arguing about the coffee. She was done arguing about most things that weren't worth arguing about. She was saving her energy for the things that were, and there would be some, there always were, because this was a real life with real people in it, not a plan she could control from the outside. But this morning, in this kitchen, with this impossible and imperfect collection of people eating slightly too thick pancakes and disagreeing about animals and getting coffee grounds on the counter, this morning was not a problem to be managed. It was just a life. Hers. Finally, fully, stubbornly, bravely hers. The notebook sat on the counter, closed. The lamp with the bent neck held its angle. The light came through the window and did what November light does. Told the truth about things, showed them plain and clear and without flattery. Emily Parker looked at her kitchen and the people in it, and she didn't reach for the notebook. She sat down at the table, in her chair with her coffee. And she stayed.